31, we'll begin open session. First up, we have agenda-related public comments. Marilyn, do we have any agenda-related comments today?
We do.
So first, I'd just like to remind everybody, thank you for joining us tonight at tonight's meeting. And there are two opportunities for audience members to address the Board of Education. Agenda-related comments are welcome at the beginning, and non-agenda-related comments before we adjourn. We appreciate community participation, but please understand that per board policy, we cannot engage in dialogue or discussion. If there is a specific question or comment that requires follow-up, the appropriate administrator will respond at a later time. And lastly, pursuant to board policies 2230 and 830, individuals addressing the board are expected to conduct themselves with respect and civility. And certainly, in the interest of time, please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Thank you for cooperating with us to make tonight's meeting efficient and productive. Please call our first speaker.
Neil D. Simone. And then Ann Bennett.
Hello, my name is Ann Bennett. I sent a 2-page memorandum dated December 1st to the Board of Education that's stating in part that this regarding possible demographic changes on undeveloped and commercial property in the southern end of its attendance area. The original reason for the purchase of the LTHS property located on Willow Springs Road, I think it would be premature to sell that property. The identified risk of an increase in student enrollment causing a need for a third LTHS campus is centered around very large parcels of land now occupied by United Parcel Service and Edgewood Valley Country Club, as well as other large residential parcels in the Burridge and Willow Springs area that could be subdivided and possibly into high-density housing. That risk has not diminished over time. It is still a real and viable risk to District 204 that prior boards of education mitigated by purchasing and maintaining the LTHS property in its asset portfolio. I also made suggestions in detail for positive uses of the LTHS property, such as converting it to revenue generator property to reduce 204's dependence on residential real estate taxes. A shopping mall and athletic facilities could be built that could generate income and be built to specifications that would allow easy conversion to a high school if ever needed. The project may be of interest to Illinois pension funds. A foundation could be set up for corporate donations and individual donations. And there is legal precedent that dates back to the Northwest Ordinance before Illinois was a state for a school district to own income-producing property. Superintendent Waterman acknowledged my communication via email and briefly spoke with me and suggested that I read the April 2022 CASARDA report. I also did mention to him there are other possibilities of the use of this property, such as building an alternative school in cooperation with neighboring high schools, to have students not aspiring to earn a college degree, earn trades that could lead them to be independent, self-sufficient, and productive individuals. This is just the start of the discussion on how we can use this property. I did read the CASARDA report, and I did find a number of what I thought were inaccuracies or material omissions or outdated assumptions that I wanted to call to your attention that I think need to be addressed. There were 3 towns in the analysis that are not in the LTHS attendance area, but in Morton High School attendance area. I am speaking of Forest View, Stickney, and McCook, except a couple of homes. The next item, there is one town that's no longer in the area, the LT attendance area, due to a decision made. Okay, you can finish, please.
Sorry, I can't get my timer to turn off. I'm so sorry.
Sure, please. By the Illinois Regional Board of Trustees. I'm speaking of an area in Hinsdale that used to go to D101 and 204 and is now part of the Hinsdale Central attendance area. The report also appears to have admitted unincorporated township of Lyons in its demographic and new family housing permanent analysis and the historical analysis of the area. These homes were built after World War II as affordable housing for veterans. They're of slab construction, prefabricated homes, often without garages and gravel driveways. The reason why I mention this information is that the replacement homes are 3 and 4 times the size of the original homes. These all impact feeder districts 105, 106, and 107. The report also omitted identification, assessment, and analysis of considerable amount of commercial and undeveloped vacant property, primarily located in the southern end of the Lyons Township attendance area that could become dense housing. The principle and the original reason why this land was purchased. The properties I'm talking about are United Parcel Service and Edgewood Valley Country Club and other large parcels in D204 that could be subdivided. The United Parcel Service property is part of a McCook-Hodgkins enterprise zone, which is kind of an Uber tax income and financing district, and was built in 1991. The Country Club properties in the area, it deserves some discussion about what's going on in the whole metropolitan area where a lot of golf courses are closed. And in Lyons Township alone, Timber Trails, Park 3, Acacia's Acre have all been developed into property in Western Springs and Indian Head Park. LaGrange Country Club is an integral part of a water...
Ms. Bennett, I'm sorry, excuse me, could you, we do need to get going with the meeting. Could you just get...
There's just...
I appreciate it.
I can give you this novel, and I do understand. It's just that there's so many issues that I did identify, and I will give you this memo. But thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak, and if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. Thank you.
Anyone else, Marilyn? That's all? Okay, thank you very much again. This concludes our agenda review. First up, we have under our agenda items tonight, under finance, the first item is the District 204 demographic trends and enrollment projections report. Dr. Waterman.
President Dillon, so per the board's request, I included within your packet the most recent enrollment report that was conducted by John Casarda, consulting demographer in August of 2022. Prior to this report, the most recent report that had been conducted was in June of 2006. Typically, enrollment studies look out approximately 15 years, so it was time this summer to renew our report. Overall, you notice it's about a 68-page report that begins with a review of housing development and demographic dynamics for the area as a whole. Then Dr. Casarda examined the effects of those dynamics, student migration and transfer patterns on enrollment changes within our associate schools. From there, he projected future 8th grade enrollment by year through 2035-36. And then finally, he analyzed recent student migration and transfer data here for LTHS, and then compared it to the associate school projections to predict enrollment projections for LT through 2036-37 school year. The projections are then presented in 3 series based upon assumptions about local births, new residential development, turnover of existing housing, and resulting migration of families with preschool and school-age children. And then really ultimately puts it into 3 different series. So Series A assumes future new residential development and housing turnover is less than currently anticipated. Series B assumes future new residential development and housing turnover that would occur as currently anticipated. And then Series C is sort of the high end, assuming future residential development and housing is greater than currently anticipated. So ultimately, the report concluded that LT's total projected enrollment for Series A would fall in the range of 3,418 students to 3,824 students. For Series B, that range would be 3,736 to 3,905. And then for Series C, which is the high end, he indicated a total projected enrollment would fall somewhere in the range of 3,936 students to 4,315 students. So I just simply wanted to provide kind of a high-level overview of that. We do have with us this evening on the call Dr. Patrick Howell, who works with Dr. Casarda on enrollment studies and is available to answer any questions that the board has around the methodology and the study that was conducted. And certainly if we have questions that Dr. Howell can't answer, we can always get those questions back to Dr. Casarda and get back to the board at a future date.
Great.
Patrick, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Patrick. I was curious.
Hello?
I was curious if you could explain to us why there are some municipalities that are in the data set that are no longer part of our current enrollment?
Yeah, well, Dr. Casar looks sort of at a broad area because villages, zip codes, they don't always exactly match the boundaries of the district. So he'll include areas that are outside, but he will weight them by roughly how much is actually in the district.
Okay, so in specific,
Also, in cases of like of a high school district, even though the village may not be in the high school itself, perhaps it's in one of the feeders, and he'll be using that to project the feeder and then onto the high school.
okay. So Brian, have you, the areas that in question are Stickney, Hinsdale, Forest View, some of those areas have, is there any discussion about how those areas now feed into our enrollment?
I would have to look specifically at the municipalities in there, like the ones you mentioned, Stickney and Hinsdale, and see if there's any relationship to our district.
So,
I can also-
think somewhere in that, I think somewhere in the report, I haven't got far, there should be a map that shows the villages and the, no, actually, I guess it doesn't show the villages. That would have been the map on page 7. But Dr. Sard also has many other maps that he uses. They produces a GIS which shows the individual, the high school districts, the feeder districts, and the village boundaries. And so even though you might say a particular district or village isn't in the district, or it's only a few hundred yards in the district, he will take that into consideration.
But if there are some that aren't included, we can have him remove that and update the projection based upon that.
I think that's, because if those areas are considered in our A, B, and C scenarios that you described, I think we should go back and remove them and be looking at the correct data set of our current areas right now.
Does that
It doesn't look like it would be very high numbers from what I can see.
Right.
But it's still just for to have this centered around
Accurate.
our situation, I think is important.
Yeah.
And then I guess I want to know too, because I believe, Patrick, that several of our feeder districts also use your work with Dr. Casarda too to do their studies as well.
Yes.
And I think that they've probably done some recent studies. I'm certain that 106 I know has done a recent study, so I imagine, because how often do you recommend that we do these?
Dr. Sard usually recommends around 3 years. After about that time, the conditions changing, you start to see the numbers sometimes start to drift away.
Yeah, I think it's, so if I, in reading this study, any recent studies that were done in our feeder districts were included in this study. And I know from, and I don't know, Michael, if when you were on 102, but I know from at my time on 102, we did some Casarda studies when we were having space challenges to try to figure out how to solve those space challenges. And, this data, even in its most aggressive scenario, puts us at only less than 400 students in the most aggressive scenario. Have you...
Wait, clarify that. That's just it.
4,400, yeah.
Yeah, 4,300.
42, so less than 400, yeah.
That's where we're at now.
So I would be interested in understanding if we were to hit that aggressive scenario, how that would flow into our space, how that would flow into class sizes, where would we have additional challenges and struggles, where are we going to be okay? So I think that would be an important.
Well, and just to add on to your question, Don, this is Julie Swinehart. We peaked, in looking at the data, which goes back to 1962, 1963, we peaked at over 5,100 students in 1973, which is much higher than the high-end projection in the series. Just for some additional context, I know teaching styles and classroom setups are different than they, I'm sure, were back before I was born, but I just wanted to add that element in before Brian responded.
I mean, that was going to be my response. If you look at the enrollment history, we're 5,100 in the early 70s, mid 70s. Education has clearly changed with class sizes, but even the last, since the early 2000s, we've hovered around 4,000 as high as 4,200 and have had no significant space concerns or anything. So anecdotally, and we would have to do utilization studies on this, but anecdotally, we would need to be much higher than 5,000 to have significant concerns. And if that were the case, then we would have to look at facility updates.
And I think, this is Julie again, if I could make one observation, then I guess ask Patrick one question. I was interested in the data, and I get it predates my almost 46, almost 47 years here in the district, except for the few years I was in college, where I know how big my high school class was in 1993 at LP, and it was interesting to me to see how quickly the growth was soon after we acquired the Willow Springs property. So, in 62, 63, we were at 4,009 students, and that quickly rose to, 4,350, 4,500, 4,900, up to, like I said, 5,130 in 72, 73. The slope of that line, if we were to, do a projection, if we were to have engaged Dr. Casarda back then, wow, that would have had, I think, a really different situation, 15 years after we acquired that property versus where we sit today. So that was, one observation was just how quickly things moved up in, call it the 60s and into the early 70s, and then how they've never, to this date, been anywhere close to that. But my question is, not knowing all about the data analytics and projection process, to what degree is Dr. Casarda continuously improving the process by seeing how accurate previous studies were? Like, is that a key part of, meaning, does the projections get better over time? Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. What he will do is he will take his model and he will look at what it did in the past and see how well, if you knew what the day was, he'd actually sort of run it backwards to see how well it'll fit. And that will give you an idea. Does that sort of answer?
Yeah, thank you. I just wondered if, and this isn't machine learning or
sort of a sanity check to say, can I predict the past, and how far back can I predict the past? Because
right, and does that kind of hone the skill going forward? So perhaps over time, all else equal, the accuracy of projections gets modestly better, or is that just too much of a stretch in anything? There's too many variables.
No, not at all.
Okay.
You always want to do a sanity check to see, it's like, if you can't project the past, which you already know, then you have certainly less certainty about how well your model's going to generalize into the future.
Okay, great. Thank you for that.
Going back to the past, though, certain demographic things have changed. For example, we've become a much more mobile society. So births is very common, or it has been common, to use the number of births 5 years in the past to sort of use to project kindergarten 5 years later. That is becoming less and less reliable as we become a more mobile society. So Dr. Casarda incorporates other factors such as new housing construction, population age structure, tear downs, rebuilds, that sort of thing.
Dr. Howell, the question, the idea of that Series 3 and being, the most aggressive area and basing it on new residential development, what do you look at there? I know in Ann's discussion just on, she mentioned Edgewood Valley Country Club, UPS. Are you looking at big spaces like that, or are you looking at residential developments that are already happening?
What Dr. Casarda typically does is he will ask the school district to contact the local developers and say, what are your best estimates at this time of the likely number of new single-family, multifamily attached, and townhouse, or multifamily attached and townhouses to be developed each year for the next 5 years, and then as an aggregate 5 years after that. And he realizes that even the county or the area planners really don't know, but they're the people who have the best, boots on the ground knowledge. And then he'll take their best estimates, and then he will lower them for his low series projection, and then raise them for his high series projections. But again, these are all based on assumptions that are from the local planners.
Allison, are you asking though, does he make assumptions on existing property transitioning to some other type of property in the future?
Exactly.
Does that make sense, Dr. Howell?
Yeah, only if the local planners or officials would say, hey, we have this piece of property over here, and there are discussions about turning it over, and we see that maybe happening in the next number of years, and if there should be so many developments of a certain type, then he would could put that in, probably in his C projection, because it's only a possibility, and then those possibilities may be delayed because you'll have public resistance or bad economic times, and so he'll usually delay those even a little bit.
So there has to be some prior knowledge of
Yeah,
existing properties.
right. It would have to be a sizable property too. If you're talking, a couple dozen homes in, the grand scheme of a district as big as D204, that's not going to make a lot of difference. It would have to be a real sizable property.
Great, thank you.
Anybody else? Nope.
Good info.
No other questions? Yeah.
Really good info.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Fascinating.
getting that study together.
Excuse me, may I ask a question?
Yes.
The area, the 75 acres that you were discussing, Sally, has anybody given you any plans on the type of housing, or the type, how many housing units they were planning on putting there, size, that sort of thing?
No, the board is discussing that moving forward.
Yeah, we haven't discussed that at all.
That would make a difference. If it's going to be sort of a planned development where they have mixed use, then you can expect probably a little bit less. If it's going to be strictly residential in the 3 to 4 or 5 bedroom range, then you can expect a little bit more yield.
That would have an impact
Of course.
on any
Yeah.
demographer report, for sure.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, but also
No.
keep in mind that only 4 years of children's ages are going to be actually affecting high school at the initial time. So they will work up over the grades over the years, but it will be a slower progression.
Right.
Not all at once, of course. Okay. Thank you.
Dr. Howell, thank you for joining us tonight. We appreciate it.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
So if you have any questions, please feel free to forward them to me. And I'll send them to Dr. Casarda.
Great.
Will do. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much.
All right, bye-bye.
Good evening.
Thanks. Now I just wanted to move on to our discussion of the potential sale of the Willow Springs property. And last week, as you know, the board sent an email communication to the community and posted it on our website, about the potential sale of this property. Parcel 1 is approximately 38 acres and was purchased in 1955, and Parcel 2 is approximately 32 acres and was purchased in 1962. And then in 2010, the district acquired a small parcel at the southeast corner of the overall site of approximately 2.6 acres. In total, that Willow Springs property is plus or minus about 72 acres. And from what we know, it was purchased with the intent to build a third campus if needed. Based on some of the projections from the Casarda study, the enrollment figures have stayed very steady over nearly 50 years, and future projections suggest the enrollment numbers remain stable. In January 2021, we asked DLA Architects to provide a comprehensive facility study of both north and south campuses. This 250-page report, if you recall, included roofing, paving, plumbing, HVAC, life safety updates, as well as several other areas that needed upgrades or repairs in order to maintain our 2 aging campuses at North and South. And there is no shortage of needs to that list. I think you probably remember that pretty well. Last spring, we unveiled our first ever district strategic plan, and as outlined in goal number 5, the district is committed to improving our facilities to meet the needs of 21st century learning. And then just this fall, we conducted a community-wide facility survey with 500+ participants responding about facility improvements. Our leadership team has also hosted focus groups that include students, staff, parents, guardians, and community members as an important part of this information gathering effort. We are still waiting on a final summary presentation with DLA that the board will hear in February. Historically, different boards at D204 have been approached about the potential sale of the Willow Springs property, and it's come to our attention that there is interest again in the Willow Springs property. Therefore, we feel the time is right to consider a potential sale on this property. And it goes without saying that the magnitude of impact this could have on improving the learning environment for our students. We believe with these funds, we could extend the life of existing facilities, modernize learning spaces, improve accessibility, enhance student and community athletic and wellness facilities, and upgrade HVAC systems for optimal learning conditions. Currently, we are in the process of hearing from our community as a result of the communication we sent last week. We continue to encourage the community to visit ltwillowspringsproperty.org. That's our website page, ltwillowspringsproperty.org, to learn more and to share their input. We value that input. We'll use it to consider our next steps. And the board will continue due diligence on this topic. We'll have some discussions around this, and we'll continue to keep the community abreast of what our next steps will be as that information becomes available. Thank you. All righty. Thanks, everyone. Okay. I'm going to turn this over to Brian Stachek.
Thank you, President Dillon.
I was just going to comment. I was just going to say.
So it looked like you wanted to say something. I'm like, feel free to jump in.
No, I was like, wait a second, I didn't want to interrupt you. I just want to say, I just appreciate everybody's work that they've put into this, and I'm really excited to see and want to learn more about the opportunities that it can bring, to us, especially in light of everything we've done when you're looking at, the strategic plan, the facility studies we did. I know I was at the LTCAC. It was really exciting to hear everybody talk about what they envision. So I think, it'll be exciting in the next bit to see what's going to come of this. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, and I just want to say thanks, too, for, I think it's a great community engagement site that we put up, and I want to echo, Carrie, what you said, that the board wants and values the community input. So I hope people will take the opportunity to go to that site. We're constantly monitoring the feedback and provide us with input, and, I'm sure there'll be other opportunities along the way.
Do you have anything?
Sorry.
I was just going to say, because I don't want to forget that you're there.
Oh, yeah, sorry, this is Julie. Not to pile on, but yeah, I really appreciate the communication that's out there, and I hope everyone is hearing this open invitation for community input, and there's the way to kind of easily click through on the site to log some input, and we'll be excited to see what folks are sharing there. This, isn't something that I'm going to take lightly. This is a big opportunity, a big potential decision, and the comparative study, I know already kind of weighed in on this aha I had looking at it, but it just was so surprising to me how quickly things were growing around the time when we bought the land, and how nothing has even come close to those numbers. So to me, I'm kind of a logical thinker when I'm kind of starting to think through the merits of this potential idea. Is there a need for what that land was originally intended to do and serve, and the comparative study and the history of data it doesn't seem to be making that case. And then I think about, is there a strong market potentially for this? And, markets, if anyone can predict where the future would go, I think they'd probably be in a different role, but, you kind of evaluate where things are at the time, so that'll be interesting to explore. And then, I think about, would you take such action, or should you even consider, unless there's a good use of proceeds? And of course, I think, and as Jill Beta-Daniels just mentioned, keeping that strategic plan as kind of our guiding, readdressing or touching each of the goals within there is something like this consistent with or inconsistent with the strategic plan. And I think as I revisited the 5 goals, I think I found 4, if not all 5, have elements that could be beneficial here. So again, hopefully you can hear the excitement in my voice. I think a lot of us have used the word excited or excitement tonight. And again, welcoming that community input to make sure we're hearing and evaluating. It's something that I'm happy to be part of as we get to talk. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Great. Thank you, everyone. So again, continue to go to the website. I'll say it again. It's ltwillowspringsproperty.org, and there is a submission form at the bottom of the page where people can add their comments, and there will be further communication that will come out following our discussions to keep everyone apprised of the situation. Thank you. Okay, next up, this is where we turn it over to Brian Stachak. We have under our finance section the approval of the fiscal year 22 audited financial statements.
Thank you, President Dillon.
Right.
So you have in your packet tonight the information related to our FY22 financial statements. And just a couple of brief words before I let Sheridan Jurgensen, who is a partner at Eder Casella, talk to the board about the process, what's in this information, that sort of thing. Just a couple of quick things. First of all, as I think I've said to this group for many years, this is kind of like my final exam, right, at the end of the year. How did things go? Did they go well? Did they not go well? And I'm proud to report that everything went well. There were no significant findings, as a result, or any findings at all as a result of this audit, so that's always good news. I would point out, and we'll talk a little bit about this after Sheridan talks to the group, we did have a $4.9 million surplus last year in our operating funds, and we'll talk a little bit about why that occurred. There's really one very specific reason as to why that occurred, and that's the corporate personal property replacement taxes. But again, we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And so you have the financial statements in the ones that you have on your electronic packet, or the draft statements that we had at the end of last week. You now have an actual final bound copy with you as well. And of course, we will be putting up the final electronic copy on the website once the board has approved and accepted these financial statements at the December 19th meeting. So that being said, I will let Sheridan talk to the group about exactly what went on, some of the processes involved, and how we got to where we are with this particular audit. Sheridan, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good evening. My name is Sheridan. I'm one of the partners at Eder Casella & Company. Just wanted to take a few minutes and go over the results of the audit for this year. First, wanted to say thank you to Brian and Kathy for just getting us all the information. There's hundreds of documents that we need in order to do the audit, and so for them to be compiling all of that, answering all of our questions, is a huge task to do on top of their normal job, and so just really appreciate their help in doing that. As Brian said, the audit went very well. The first thing in the audit report is actually our opinion. It's an unmodified opinion. This is the best opinion you can find under accounting standards. And really, in layman's terms, it just means that all the testing we did and everything that we looked at, that we were able to say that we feel the financial statements are free from material misstatement. It also talks in that opinion about internal controls. And internal controls are very important, and we're not only looking at what's written in those procedures, but also making sure that they're being followed, which is the more important part. So sitting down with the people who are processing their transactions and making sure that those are being followed. Also making sure that there's good checks and balances, controls, review processes, and there was no issues with those. And as Brian mentioned, there was no significant deficiencies where if there wasn't any issues with internal controls that were out. In the financial statements, I always tell boards, if they look at nothing else in the audit report, the first section is called the management discussion and analysis section, and I would recommend you read that. It's a quick overview. It's about 6 or 7 pages, gives you kind of a quick overview overview of what happened during the year, some of the reasons for the changes and variances during the year. It's just kind of a more user-friendly way to kind of understand the audit report and actually huge document that it is. So, we also do a single audit as part of the audit, which is the audit of your federal awards. We tested ESSER 3 money as well as Title I low-income money this year, and had no issues with that, no compliance issues or anything that was that. As Brian said, there was no management letter comments, so no recommendations or concerns that we had as part of the audit. And then lastly, the other thing that we do submit is the AFR to the to ISBE, and in there they calculate the financial profile. The district is at a 4 on a scale of 0 to 4, and you have been at least for the past several years. So that continues to be at the highest level as well. So overall, just good news to report. But I do want to at least open it up if anyone has any specific questions on the report.
It sounds like you passed your exam.
Yeah, I think you did. And
Us,
yes.
Brian.
I won't grade myself, but I think it went pretty well.
Yeah, it went really well. And as always, you guys do spend a lot of time with Kathy, I know, compiling all that data and that information for the auditors. So thanks for doing that. Thanks for spending a lot of extra time to do it. But it's worth it.
This is Julie, and, you know, I'm a former auditor, so I can't not weigh in here, but this is, congratulations to everyone. I know, Brian Stachek, you tend to be modest, but this is something to be proud of you and Kathy and the whole team to get a clean opinion, again, year after year, and it sounds like, I don't want to call you a model client, but sounds like you might be a model client, so great cooperation with the auditors. I was so pleased to see that in the materials. Unqualified opinion, no internal control concerns, everything made sense. So really, job well done once again, and thank you for making it easy on us by being so thorough and great attention to detail and the whole big picture as well. So thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it. And patient, and you explain things so well to us, and it makes it a lot easier for all of us non-auditors to digest the information, so I appreciate that.
And I would second that. You never get frustrated. I could ask you 10 times about the tax levy, so I really understood it. And you were like,
That'll be up in a little bit. We can.
I'm excited to talk about it again. I'm looking forward to it. So.
Not in a lot, right?
Yeah, but I have it now. That's
good.
I have no more questions, so that's going to be a win. Thank you.
So thanks to you and the team, and thank you for coming in tonight to share that with us. Appreciate it.
I think this is the final year, right, Jared, of our current contract.
I believe you're
So we'll probably look at an extension going forward, as long as you want us still around, that's all. You know.
Again, you are a model client.
Thanks. So we'll talk.
Fast.
We had 3 years ago, our auditing firm that we had at the time came to us, actually it's really 4 years ago now, and they said, look, we're no longer going to be in the business of auditing school districts. And so we went out with an RFQ essentially, and that's when we found Eder Casella, brought them on, and we've had, again, a great relationship with them, so we're hoping to continue that going forward as well.
That's awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sheridan.
Pointing us in the right direction of where to focus.
So-
I was going to add that. I've tagged it.
Are we going to talk about that for the surplus?
Yeah, we'll do it right now.
Okay.
So let's, first of all, before we go into that, those specifics on what we have here, I do want to say thank you to Kathy Moran. Kathy does an outstanding job. She's the one who puts a lot of this information together for the auditors. Granted, sure, I do some of it as well, but Kathy does a good portion of it as well, and Kathy does a fabulous job. She's the one on the phone with them talking, saying, no, wait a minute, I put this over here, I didn't put that over, that sort of thing. So Kathy does a fabulous job. I also want to say thank you to the other offices as well. So, for example, in Ed's office in HR, they'll come in and the auditors will look for certification. They'll pull information on our certified staff. Do they actually have the appropriate certification? We have to show that to them. Scott Eggerding's office is the one that does a lot of the work, again, with Kathy. When they talked about those single audits, so those grants, Scott's office does a lot of work with that. And again, as I said, so does Kathy. Brian's office, there'll be items that they pull out of the superintendent's office that they're looking for. one of the items that they typically look for are the economic disclosure statements on an annual basis. And so we have to provide, all of that information to them. And so really, there's nothing off limits in the district when they come in as far as written documentation. So a lot of offices involved, so I think, like I said, this really goes out to everybody. So it's a job well done, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
That being said, let's go on quickly. I want you to kind of take a look at the financials of this information, right? So if you look on page 178 not of the audited financial statements, but in your packet. So what I do is I typically will break this down into the numbers here. So you can actually see how did we operate in the fiscal year sort of budget to actual, and then I'll on the third document, I'll give you a quick look at how it all looked combined together, okay? So if you look on page 178.
178 on the...
178 in your packet. In your packet, not in the financial statements, not here.
Okay.
But in your packet on page 178. So if you take a look there, in the left-hand column there, again, we have this broken down by fund. The Ed Fund, O&M Fund, Transportation, those are our three major operating funds. All right, the Ed Fund is everything, we pay for everything out of there and receive revenue in there that all goes to the educational program. The O&M Fund, Fund 20, is all building and grounds. And then transportation is exactly what it says it is. It's all transportation-related costs. And then we also spend and receive money in the IMRF Social Security Fund. And literally that is sort of a clearing fund where we take money in, and the only thing we pay out of there are our obligations for IMRF, which is the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund. That is the retirement fund for the non-certified staff, essentially, and then for Social Security and Medicare. And so that's what that account is used for. So that account really goes in conjunction with our salaries, okay, because that's what you're paying that based on. That being said, let's just kind of take a quick walk through here. And what I want to point out to you, when you look at the bottom there, you see that we had a total budget of roughly $87 million in total revenue. And we took in $91 million, a little over $91 million in total revenue. And the one that I really want to bring to your attention are the local sources under the Education Fund, under 10, and the local sources under Fund 20. And so you'll notice there that in 21, 22, so FY 22, we were almost $2 million over that revenue source in the Education Fund. And then we were in local sources in the O&M fund, we were a little over $4 million over in that line item. And so really what that comes down to is what I've talked to the board about multiple times in these past really 2 years, is the corporate personal property replacement tax. And so just to give you an idea, prior to the FY 21 year, so FY 20 and prior to that, district would average about $3.3 to $3.6 million in revenue in that source annually. In FY 21, we were right around $4.7 million. So there was about $1 million, a little bit more than $1 million increase than what we normally would have. And in 2022, we took in $10.7 million. So that is really, when you think about the jump from $3.5 million, let's call it, to 10.7, it's a tremendous jump, and not something that we would see coming. That's really all based on what corporations are paying as far as their corporate personal property replacement taxes. And typically, as the economy does well, so does that revenue source. I've never seen it this high ever in this district or in my prior district, just simply even by the percentages. And so that particular number was really what was driving. If you look at the bottom, we were $4.3 million. We had $4.3 million more in revenue than what we had anticipated. And again, that's a direct result of that corporate personal property replacement tax. So really, that is the majority of that surplus that we just talked about. If you go over to page 179, now you see the expenses. And on 179, if you go down to the bottom, the grand total, we had budgeted $86.9 million of total expense. We spent $86.4 million in total expense, and so we were off by, we spent $435,000 less than what we had budgeted. And so you'll see there are some variations in some of the numbers, and we obviously keep an eye on that as we go throughout the year. But if you take essentially that number and add it back to that $4.3 million of money that was from the corporate personal property replacement taxes, really for the most part, there's the $4.9 million surplus. And so, for the most part, had we not had that additional corporate CPPRT money, it would have looked very different, because there were actually a couple of sources in here that we had money budgeted for. There was, I want to say, like $1 million from the state of Illinois for the grant that we still have not received yet, although I think we're on the cusp of doing that. We also had another $1 million of ESSER money in there that was not received in that year, but will be received in the coming year. So it really would have been quite a bit different had we looked at that and had not had that surplus. Any questions on those?
Not really that, but how are you projecting then for the coming year?
So in our current year, in the FY23 year, I have about $7.8 million of CPPRT in there. And that was a number, I will tell you, there's no great rhyme or reason to it. When I talked with my other colleagues, the business managers, directors of business services in other districts, everybody was kind of targeting around 75 to 80% of what they took in the prior year. Probably a little bit conservative, and I think I mentioned that to the board at the time. We're trending in a similar direction to what we were last year. But, we receive the revenues almost once a month, and so we'll have to see if this continues as we go forward. So it was really sort of a consensus to say, look, that was a really high watermark number last year. Is that expected for the coming years? We don't have a great answer, but the thought was maybe a little bit more conservative, and that's kind of what we've done. As far as going forward, well, for the FY24 year, we will start to look at that here as I get into January, February, March, and we'll see where that number is trending on the current year. And again, that may not have anything to do with what next year's number actually looks like. Based on what we see in the economy, if things were to start slowing down, that number could go down. And maybe, I don't know how quickly or, how slowly, but again, it's a number that we really don't, the Department of Revenue, Illinois Department of Revenue puts out an estimate usually in late August of any given year for the next fiscal year. And this year, I think they were projecting about $10.7 million for us in the current fiscal year. But last year, when we took in this $10.7 million, I think they were about $5.5 million. Yeah. So even that estimate is just an estimate at that. Look, we'll take the money.
Yeah, right. That's
Good problem. Yeah, it is. It is. So then if you go over to page 180, then you kind of see, so this is the one that kind of really breaks down everything for you in terms of where we actually take in our revenues, where we have our expenditures. And really what you see here is if you look at line 8, that's the corporate personal property replacement tax. And if you look over on the far right column there, you see the total of what we took in. First of all, you see what we put in each individual fund, and then you see that almost $10.7 million of total revenue in that particular fund. Or I'm sorry, that particular line item. And then, of course, we have all of the other revenue sources there. I don't break them out specifically to each one, but kind of you can see where we are with state sources, with state grants, the evidence-based funding, and then our federal dollars as well. So in that far right-hand column, you'll see all of the totals. And then in each one of the funds that I talked about, you'll see what we put in there for each one of those items. And so, again, I don't include in this particular analysis the bond and interest fund, because the bond and interest fund is not one of our operating funds. That really is that clearing account for the money to come in. It sits there, we pay our bond obligations, and it goes out. So there's no other activity in that account. So that one, and those dollars that are in that bond and interest fund that would sit as a surplus can't be used for anything other than your bond and interest payment. So it's not as though you can use it for any other items. And then if you go down to the expenditures on line 17, starting, you go across, you look at our salaries where we put those, the employee benefits, and again, purchase services, and you can go all the way across the lines there and see the totals. And then, again, you go down to line 26, the excess revenue over expenses, that's the $4,895,000 surplus. And then on line 28, you see the ending fund balances, which, by the way, on line 4, you see the beginning fund balances, and then on line 28, you see those ending fund balances now including those surplus dollars in there. There's one line item here that I want to just spend a couple minutes talking about, and that is our earnings on investments, which is line 9. You'll see that there is a negative number of almost $23,000 there for that current year. I want to talk a little bit about that because it's very unusual, first of all. I think I explained to this group that back in, obviously we left the Township Treasurer's office in July 1st of 2021. And so what occurred with our essentially investment pool, we didn't have one at that particular point. And so back at that particular point, we had all of this cash, right, that was given to us. That's ours. And we were looking to begin reinvesting these dollars. Well, this was sort of the trifecta of bad things that happened during this time period. First of all, you go back to, by the way, and I have Charlie Zacher here from PMA. He's a senior vice president with PMA, who we work with for our investments. So Charlie, if I misspeak or something, please, yeah, sure. You please, let me know. But really, when I talk about this trifecta things, first of all, we had all this cash that we wanted to go back and reinvest. Short-term investments at the time of July 1st of 2021 were pretty much a zero rate, opportunity at that particular point. There was really nothing available out there. You might get 5 basis points, and just to give you an idea, 100 basis points is 1%. And we were at the time maybe getting 5 basis points, probably not even, probably something less than that. So we had no short-term, investments to speak of. Now having all of this cash from essentially the transfer money from the TTO, we had no long-term investments that were maturing in that year. So we had to now reestablish those long-term investments, which we've done, but again, we had nothing maturing in this year from long-term investments that, let's say we bought a year, 2 or 3 years ago, that would have then provided some additional interest income in this year. The third piece of this, and this is the one that's a little more frustrating, but nothing we can do about it, is going back to that zero rate environment. We did start then establishing some longer-term investments and even some shorter-term investments at some lower rates, right? Because we thought, well, these are the best rates possible. So as you go into September, October, November, December that year, we started purchasing. We have investments out there. Well, the Fed then started raising rates dramatically over the next 6 months. And as you probably heard, they were going up, 75 basis points each time they're doing this to kind of slow some of the growth in the economy down. Well, what happens at that particular point is we're now holding on to investments that in the market are no longer essentially worth what they were before, only on paper. And I want to be clear on that. It's only on paper. Because let's say we buy something now at 200 basis points, 2%, but that same investment that we purchased in, let's call it September, now in March, would be worth 4%. If we wanted to do something with that investment, let's say we wanted to sell it and then take that money, reinvest it at the 4%, we'd have to sell that current investment at a loss in order to do that. So there's what we call the mark-to-market valuation of these. And so, again, what I want to be clear on here, there's really 2 parts to this. There's, first of all, the cash dollars that we actually take in a year, because we do take dollars in, right, when investments mature. But then there's also the valuation of the investments that we're holding on to. And so, unfortunately, with that escalation of the interest rates that we've seen over the last 6 months, we are now sitting on investments that, again, on paper, if we said, hey, look, we were going to turn these over into something else, we have to sell them at a loss in order to do that. We're not doing that. We're not selling them. We're not getting rid of them. We're holding them. Yet, that makes a big difference in terms of what we report in our current interest income. And so, again, had we had some of those long-term investments come into play, where we would have had, a couple $100,000 more of interest, this negative number wouldn't even be here, right? It would be eradicated because we would have had other dollars in there. But that's really why I wanted to point that out, because it's a unique situation to us and a unique situation in terms of where we came from starting July 1st of 2021. So, Charlie, I'm sorry, I wanted to just see if you had anything to add to that, obviously, the accuracy of my statements, hopefully I'm true, but you can kind of go ahead and...
I was listening very carefully, and everything you said was actually 100% correct.
Thanks.
So, very, very well done. I would just reiterate again that the accounting function of the marking to market is the critical component that it's talking about. So while you're holding the asset will mature at 2%. You'll have earned 2% in the dollars, but when you have to do the accounting for that, it looks like a loss, because if you had to sell it at that time, it would generate a loss. So again, I think that the important thing to note is when we put together an investment portfolio, it's a buy and hold strategy. We buy it we lock in a rate, it earns that rate. But again, from an accounting standpoint, especially when we're buying some of these treasury bonds, as rates have come up as fast as they have as fast as they've come back probably since the late 70s, early 80s, that has created this rapid increase in rate, which means that the price of the assets that you're holding go lower, meaning those that on paper amount is a loss. So that will all, once it comes to mature, that'll correct itself. There will not be any physical dollar losses. It will mature and you'll earn a certain rate percentage. And then as rates stabilize, which they're projected to do here at some point, I don't know if you guys have paid CNBC watch the new term is the terminal rate. When is the Fed going to stop raising rates? Well, it sounds like that could be fairly soon here. So we might have another 50 basis point increase here in December, but we're probably getting top right around this 5% range, and then hopefully that'll be about it. But I think next year, like as Brian had mentioned, your next report, your next AFR will have a full year's worth of interest of those investments maturing, interest being accumulated, and we probably will not see any negative interest holdings there next year.
Even the short-term investments, Charlie, right now, what are we seeing? 2.5%,
Yeah, money market rates now are about 3.5%. 3.5%.
So, and again, when we entered that pool last year, or say in July 1st, what was it, about zero?
It was zero.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what a difference, 12 months makes. And honestly, I don't know if anybody saw this one coming.
Nobody ever saw it. So when we were putting together, the Fed had indicated that, look, inflation hasn't been something that the Fed has worried about in 40 years, right? So I think they got a little used to not having to worry about inflation, that they would just make easy money and then we come out of COVID and do this. But, we had the perfect storm with I'm not going to give you the inflation list. We had a perfect storm of, hey, there's a lot of free dollars flying out there. There's not a lot of supply, and now there's a lot of demand because COVID's ending. So that's kind of a perfect recipe for inflation, which is why we've seen rates increase as fast as they have.
Thanks, Charlie. That being,
This is Julie, just with a quick question. So, Brian, are these essentially unrealized losses?
that's exactly right. They're unrealized losses. That's right.
And you're describing as paper losses. So we haven't, like you said, haven't lost dollars. This is just sort of the relative position based on what, and again, many people who maybe have a portfolio of equities or stocks are seeing something perhaps similar. But just to be clear, we have an investment policy, and you're investing in, I'd say, quite well, it depends on relative to what, but pretty conservative type investments per Illinois regulations, et cetera. Can you just refresh briefly on whether those statements are true? We have an investment policy and it restricts, I guess, limits what kind of risk we could take.
Yes, correct. Exactly everything you said is true. So we have an investment policy. In addition to that, we also are governed by the Illinois Public Funds Investment Act. And so really what that does is it limits our opportunities to invest to, 5 or 6 different vehicles, right, for the most part.
Call plain vanilla type investments, safety of principal being at the add of all the investments.
Right. So really, ultimately, money markets, treasuries, CDs, we can go into, we don't have any of these right now, we can go into municipal bonds, we can go into mortgage-backed securities, although we might have some of those within the LTD account. But those are the things that we can get into. As Julie, as you had mentioned earlier, we are not in stocks. We are not in any sort of a risky investment like that. There's nothing out there that is like that. So, and again, PMA does a great job with us working with them. They know what we can do, what we can invest in, and they're not going to recommend any sort of investment outside of that, the Public Funds Investment Act. So.
Yeah. Okay. And directionally, that makes sense based on how quickly short-term interest rates were rising, and where investors could invest differently. It wouldn't be trading in these lower, like you described, 2% returns. They're going to go into the 4% returns, which drives the value down. But again, no cash being lost. This will all at maturity prove positive. Okay,
yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions at all on any of this? Okay. So, Charlie, thank you.
Thank you.
Charlie, thank you.
So on Monday night, what we would ask the board to do is to vote to accept the financial statements as presented. Okay?
And that 4.9 million surplus, is that rolled into the fund balance, or is that?
That's right. Yeah, that's rolled into the fund balance. And so those dollars are usable from each one of those individual funds, or there are opportunities to transfer those dollars right now that still exist, to transfer those funds from one fund to another, to use them in other funds. So if we were looking at these and we had said, look, we want to spend some of these dollars, again, as we've done in the past, for future capital projects, that can be done.
Well, yeah, because one of the things that, I don't know if we get to this, but like that is kind of out there is that we're like operating in a deficit somewhat. Now, it's partially because of the construction costs that were rolled in to this year. So, is that correct or not?
So,
like there's like 1 point something million.
So, right. So we talked about the opportunity, the possibility that we could see a deficit spend this current year. However, what we also need to keep in mind, this is what I've talked about before, if these corporate personal property replacement taxes continue to come in the way they are, we may not be in that position at all. When I talked about the budget for the current year, I had said, look, we're going to probably be a little bit more conservative on these corporate personal property replacement tax numbers, and so that's what we're doing. We may not deficit spend at all, but there was that possibility when we put the budget together that based on that we could. That would not be a big issue, not at all, because we have the money to cover it. It's not as though we're out there without the money to cover these. And so again, we would potentially in future years also, based on the amount of surplus we have, based on our revenue to expense ratio, all those kinds of things, we look at that and we could spend some more of this money in other projects. Again, I can tell you that CPPRT number was very unexpected. We also have to keep in mind too, there are other revenue sources that could change on us as well. I don't see a ton of that happening, but I continue to look at that all the time and see where we're headed. So, sure. And I think one of the other points I wanted to just kind of make, we ended up with, $52 million, essentially in our reserves at this particular point. But again, I think one of the things we have to keep in mind is that we spent $86.4 million last year. And so there are, even amongst my colleagues, I've heard people say, well, LT, you guys got plenty of money. I say, well, we're right about where we want to be in terms of, a little bit higher than 50% at this particular point in terms of expense to fund balance ratio. But we're in good shape. We're not by any stretch of the imagination in a position where there are districts out there that have 1 year's worth of, so if that was the case, you'd have in our case, have $86 million in reserves. We don't have that. There are districts that have two years in reserve. We don't have that. So we're certainly in a good, healthy position, but I certainly don't think that it's excessive by any stretch of the imagination at all. So I think that's important to kind of get out there. Sure. Any additional questions on that at all? Great. Sorry, I know that was long.
No, that was good stuff, yeah. But I guess we can move on to Jill's favorite subject then.
I do like it. Now that I understand it, I love it.
The next item is the approval of the 2022 tax year levy. Back to you, Brian.
Thank you, President Dillon. I'm going to go quick on these. We've already talked at length about the tax levy, and we talked about that, last month. I've given you a couple of overviews. Typically, we'll start that in October, and I think next year we will as well because we'll have the numbers. But at this particular point, I've not changed anything, and I don't really anticipate anything changing for the board meeting on the 19th. The only documents that I've added to this that you haven't seen would be page 185, which is our actual final certificate of levy. That's the document that we are required to use by the Illinois State Board of Education. That goes to the county. That's on page 185 and 186. Then we also have the actual resolution beginning on page 187. Again, all the numbers here are the same. There's nothing that's different. They're different worded versions of these. On page 189, we have the certification of the levy that the board did what they said they did. And then finally, on page 191, we have the document that says that we will hold the truth and taxation hearing that we did. And we will be doing that. Notice is up on the website for that. And then also, it will be published in the newspaper this coming Thursday, December 8th, as we have a window between 7 and 14 days from the hearing to publish. And so we will be in that window on the 8th of December, and it will be going out in the newspaper that day. Other than that, like I said, essentially, we're at a 6.47% increase in our operating funds with a total levy of $77,919,000, which also includes $50 million of new property. And again, we've talked about that at length. So nothing's changed other than the few documents that I've added here. And I think that's all that I really have on that, unless there's any additional questions.
Brian, I do.
Sure.
Question for you about, I know we're at that 5.0 CPI,
Yes.
and I know that is less than the actual CPI.
Right.
Which we normally follow. The only question I have is, given that we're hitting that 4.9 million surplus, I'm trying to balance those out of, we're getting the 4.9 million surplus because of the
CPPRT.
ERT.
Right.
Help me justify that 5.0. And I am justifying it because of the fact that it is actually lower than the inflation rate or the CPI out there right now.
Yes.
But talk me through that, of helping me justify that.
So, first of all, let's go back to what you said in December of 2021, right? 2021. Inflation was 7%. We're capped at a 5% increase. And so when you say that we normally follow the CPI, that's right, because the property tax extension limitation law says we're the lesser of 5% or whatever the actual CPI is. So if CPI was 1.4% like it was the prior year, that's what we would have as 1.4%. And so ultimately what ends up happening is they're accounting for the inflation for, any taxing body because everybody does that. Now, let's go back to kind of what I said earlier. That the majority, really, all of that surplus is related to that corporate personal property replacement tax number. I wish I could tell you that that number is going to stay that way going forward. I can't. And so if that number comes back down to more historical norms, right? Let's say it drops back down to, 5 million and then 4 million. You don't have that surplus anymore in that one given year. And so those surpluses are kind of one-time operating expenses, right, that you accumulate based on what happens in that year. Now, it is $4.9 million, and that's true. But really, when you look at what your operations are based on your levy, which is really what goes to support all of that, I would certainly say that we would want to take the money here knowing full well that in future years, I can't tell you that the corporate personal property replacement tax numbers are going to be that high. And that could really make a difference in terms of our financials. Now, you can certainly look at that and say, well, there's a surplus here. But this also then in the levy moves forward every year, right? So if you don't take some of the money in a levy in a given year, you may be able to get it back in a future year, and you may not be able to get it back in a future year. So that becomes the other piece of this. And so that's why, again, the recommendation would be to say, look, we take this money at this particular point, and then we would use those surpluses, those operating surpluses, for really capital expenses for the buildings and move forward in that manner.
I like that.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Sure.
And like you said, that's a one hit, whereas this inflation number going even actually 2% lower than the inflation number.
Yeah.
Is something that we're going to be hit with expenses at that rate.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We don't operate in a vacuum. Look, if everybody here is paying $4 for a gallon, oh, well, it's coming down now, I get it. But let's say you're paying $4 for a gallon of gasoline, so are we. And the other point that I wanted to make, which I think is important, is that when you look back at the history of the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, right? So the increases that we've had aggregate to our levy, over the last 20 years, don't hold me exactly to this number, but it's about 2.25%. And so, look, the district, the prior boards, prior administrations have made responsible choices to continue to live within those numbers, right? Those when things weren't as great at one point, last year's CPI was 1.4%. And so that's being applied to the current levy right now, and we're continuing to operate within that. And so I think that's an important point to make, because we're doing what we have to live within our means, within the rules of the game, I guess, that we have to play. And so I think that's important as well for everybody to know. Yeah, that was awful.
That was awful.
That was awful.
Brian, this is Julie, and like Allison, I wanted to ask a question on this topic. The CPI, just as a reminder again, and apologies that I've asked this before, the CPI we're referring to pertains to December of 2021, is that true?
That's accurate, yes.
Okay, and I know you and I don't yet know today what December of 2022's figure will be.
Yeah.
But it's not going to be 1.4%. I think I could probably safely make that assumption, meaning, and I'm not trying to get ahead another year, but this is not a one-time situation where CPI/inflation is high. This is the start of it. And I guess we are always operating sort of in a year in arrears, meaning last year's budget that was based on, what was the number again? Something much lower. Is it the 1.4?
1.4%, yes.
Yeah, but we've been operating because of the nature of the calculation in this hugely inflationary environment, which is, I think, the point you just made. We just wanted to flag that this is a topic that is not just isolated to right now. We'll be probably talking about it a year from now in some context as well. But I think, when I think about construction prices and some of the information we've heard from DLA over the last, 12 months or so, and those are bigger ticket items. I mean, some of those costs are going up far in excess of these amounts. So I don't know. I'm always trying to think about the expenses, and some expenses are contractual with the multi-year agreements that we have with the different personnel groups. Other elements of our expenses are utilities, and like you mentioned, gas, and then other elements of our spend are kind of outside the bounds of this and where construction prices are going. So there's a lot of different data points to consider as you think about how to best guide and serve the school on this topic in order to be able to achieve some of the variability in the spend component, some which might be a little bit lower than 5% or even lower, or at least lower than CPI, and some that are certainly higher. So it just kind of, I'm trying to think about it more broadly than just the 1 year and any just one concept. And I feel like the 5% is comfortable to a place to land when you consider kind of the broader picture. So thank you.
And Julie, you are correct. We will know the December CPI, a little bit more than a month from now, and that will be applied to next year's levy. And as you pointed out, it's not going to be 1.4%, that's for sure. It's probably still going to be right around that 5% number, because that's where we're trending at this point. So. Thanks. Okay. You're welcome.
Okay.
Supplemental bond and interest levy?
Yeah, that's where we're headed next. We're
Okay.
going to discuss that.
Yeah, this one has, again, nothing's changed here from when we initially talked about this. And again, quick reminder, this is to increase the bond and interest levy. The reason that we have a separate resolution for this is because prior to 2009, districts could not increase their bond and interest levy. And then the Local Government Debt Reform Act in 2009 said you could do that, but you could only do it again by the same factor of the CPI that you raised the regular levy. But they said in order to do that, you now have to have this separate resolution as part of that. So quick numbers for 2021, our bond and interest levy was $2,575,000. 5% increase allows for almost $129,000 more dollars, for a total bond and interest levy in 2022 of $2.7 million. And again, the bond and interest levy is for one purpose only, and that is to pay off the debt for the district. Goes into that bond and interest fund that I talked about earlier, goes out to make those payments, and that's it. There's no other use in that particular fund. And so, again, when the district, when we sell bonds, we calculate this into that factor now in terms of what we're paying back on an annual basis. And so what we do is we say, yeah, we're going to use some factor, 2%, 2.5%, whatever. We push that forward for the 10 years. Now, of course, 10 years, that's a long time to try to project where you're going, but nonetheless, that's what you do. And so in this case, that was projected, or I should say was, implemented when the district sold bonds back in 13 and 14. And so this is just simply to raise that dollar amount, that levy by that dollar amount. Again, no operating expenses out of this one at all. So we'll at the December 19th meeting, take a separate resolution for that. And this actually isn't due until sometime in February, I think, but I just do it with the regular levy, and I turn them all into the county at the same time. That way, there's no forgetting to turn it in or something along those lines.
We'll have to discuss it again in February.
Yeah. No, we won't have to. We're done.
Okay, great. Okay, then our final item under finance is the approval of the fiscal year 22 property tax relief grant application.
Yes. So this is a bit of some good news, but I will tell you that we've done this obviously for a number of years here, and we've not received a property tax relief grant. However, I think it's important to apply for it. And so just quickly, the state of Illinois has created this property tax relief grant. They've been doing it now for, I think, 3 or 4 years. And again, for next year, they've allocated almost $50 million of money for school districts for this property tax relief grant. What I can tell you is if you look there in the middle of that first paragraph, we are number 642 in line for a property tax relief grant with $797 million of possible districts' money ahead of us. So I'd like to think we might get a grant, but most likely we're probably not going to. That being said, I think we still need to apply for it. And so ultimately, right now, what the state is telling us, they send a spreadsheet out and they say, okay, Lyons Township High School District 204, if you want to apply for the grant, the maximum amount you could apply for would be, you would have to provide almost $3 million of reduction in your tax levy. And then they would provide us a $1.3 million return on that. And so really, essentially, if you look at it, we'd be losing it to be over 2 years. We'd be losing $1.7 million each year, right? So there's a $3.4 million loss over 2 years. However, after 2 years is over, that $1.3 million that the state provided then becomes part of your permanent state funding. And you can then go back, if the district so chooses, to increase the levy again back to those original numbers and recapture some of that $3.4 million. We don't have to do that. There's plenty of options out there, and we'll talk about those if, in fact, we were to be notified that we received a grant, and we'll go from there. Let's put it that way. There's no reason to get into that conversation here yet. I have a little explanation down here of how that would look, but again, I don't see much of a reason to go into that right now, really for 2 reasons. Number one, I'd like to think we're going to get a grant, but we probably won't based on the numbers. And then secondly, once we do, then we would kind of go through those specifics and really talk those numbers. So, but I do think it's worth it to apply. If plenty of other districts don't apply, maybe we'll get something, and that would be great. So we would just obviously at Monday night's or the 19th meeting look to approve the submission of that application for that grant.
This is the 5th year you've applied?
We've applied every year that it's been available. So yeah, maybe this is year number 5, 4, somewhere in that area. Yeah, that's right. And so again, we'll do it again.
I appreciate you going for it. Can't win if you don't play.
No, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
642.
And maybe 639 of those districts
Never
won't think
know.
they'll get one, and then we will.
You never
I
know.
don't know.
They
But-
might turn it down.
But we'll do it.
Okay.
have a couple questions.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I didn't know if you saw me. So,
Didn't see you. Thanks, Jill.
okay, how did we get determined to be at 642 in line?
Great question. So what the state does.
I feel like it is a good question when you say it's a great question for me.
It is, it's a great question.
Okay.
And I'm going to give
I
you
like that
I'm going to give you the overview. What they do is they look really at the types of districts, first of all. So unit districts, which are essentially K through 12 districts. They look at elementary districts, K through 8, and then they look at high school districts. And then what they do is they take the total tax rate of each one of these districts, and then they rank them, essentially. And they say, okay, who has the highest tax rate going all the way down to the lower tax rate? And so, again, that's kind of the 50,000-foot view of that whole process. I'm more than happy to share the spreadsheet with you.
I think that was a good
Yeah.
snapshot.
And ultimately, that's what happens. So our tax rate is essentially lower than roughly 641 of those districts that appear on that list. And so that's really how they call it the operating tax rate. And so that's how they really determine where you end up on that list.
Okay. And then, I know it seems like a good idea, but I don't understand it fully enough to really, what are the risks if we apply? Because if you're reducing the tax levy, we have then a risk to the district that we're not bringing in as much money. There
Right.
seems to be some, it's not all necessarily positive.
Yeah,
because we're not bringing in as much money if we do reduce it. I mean, obviously, the taxes go down for everybody, but it seems to me then that you would have a huge jump in taxes after 2 years coming
Might.
back to everybody, and that could be a sticker shock.
That's exactly right. You might. That is one of the downsides to this. And that is that if you abate these dollars over the first 2 years, the state fills in with the $1.3 million each year. And then if the district decides, again, these are decisions to be made in the future. But in that third year, if the district says, well, we're going to go back and put that, $3 million back into the tax levy, then you would see sort of this roller coaster ride with the numbers in your levy because you're down $3 million for 2 years. Then all of a sudden you jump up another $3 million. So those things are possible, and that is one of the options. Now, the district also can say, well, we're not going to put that money back in the levy. The danger there is the state eventually says, we're not going to keep giving you the $1.3 million because we don't have it anymore. So it's not without some calculated risk.
But I mean, we're really reducing the amount of money we're bringing in.
Right.
Getting the levy.
Yes.
I mean, not by getting the grant, not for the levy.
Well, you would reduce the levy for 2 years. And so you're right. For those 2 years, you would reduce that down, like $1.7 million is what we would lose each year. So a total of $3.4 million over 2 years. Now, the difference is, again, the upside to this is that if the district says, well, we're going to go back and we're going to recapture that $3.4 million, we have the ability to add that back into the levy.
When you say recapture it, we're recapturing it from our taxpayers.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Yes.
But in the third year.
In the third year.
So I guess what is the benefit of getting the grant? Because if we're going to go back and recapture it from them, is it just that we are recapturing the 3.4 million and that it's actually given us 1.3 each year, so we've actually, in the end, gained 2.6 million?
So ultimately, so you're on the right track. If, in fact, the district says, well, again, there are many options here, but let's assume that, so the answer to your first question is, for those 2 years at least, there's a reduction of property taxes to the community. So there's benefit number one. Benefit
to the community, but that doesn't necessarily mean benefit to our school if we're taking a reduction in taxes.
Correct. That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
But is it a benefit to our community? I mean, I guess the question I would ask, if we're reducing the taxes we're bringing in, it's only a benefit to the taxpayer, but it may not be a benefit to our community. I'm just arguing, on the other side of it, if our school then is having to cut something or not be able to offer what we want to continue to growth because we're reducing what we're bringing in.
Those are all items we would have to consider. If they notified us that we had a grant, then we would have to consider that and say, do we really want to go forward?
Even though you've applied for the grant, we don't have to, it's not an
Correct.
approval of this, it's just an approval to apply for the grant, so we'd have to
That's
discuss
my understanding of what they said.
if we
That's
were
right.
granted the grant.
That's right. Because we still then would have to abate dollars out of our levy. And if the district said, well, we're not going to abate the dollars, then the state's not going to give us the grant, ultimately is what's going to end up happening. So now long-term, what's the benefit to the district? If we decide that after those first 2 years, we're going to go back to our original levy amount. So we reduced it by $3 million. We're going to go back to that original levy amount. The state of Illinois now says, okay, you can do that, and we're going to continue to give you that $1.3 million going forward, as long as we have those dollars. So really, kind of going back to your first scenario, ultimately, in the end, we took this hit for 2 years, but now the state of Illinois is giving us $1.3 million more going forward for as long as they would have that money available. So we've actually increased our revenues over the course of that time by $1.3 million. Now, really, if you think about it, the first couple of years would be sort of that recapture of the 3.4 that we gave back. But then in that year 4 or 5, then you would start to see, okay, we've recaptured what we gave back before from the state, but now we have this additional $1.3 million going forward.
Okay, and then, so I appreciate that. So my last question then would be, if we're 642, so like you have 100 school districts ahead of us that get that grant. So next year would we presumably be 542 because they wouldn't need to keep applying for the grant once they're granted the grant?
They recalculate it every year.
Okay.
So once, based on that tax rate from the current year, prior year, however you want to look at it, because that's the numbers they use, they'll recalculate it. We're not ever really going to move up that high.
But if you have like 100 districts doing this and they're getting the grant, they never have to reapply for the grant once they're given the grant?
They can reapply again in future years.
And get additional monies
That's
on
right.
that? Okay.
Yes.
Got it.
Yeah, it's not as
That's
though-
where we're not going to move up. It's kind of like, it's a waiting game, and in
That's right.
5 years we'll be.
Yeah, to my knowledge, they can reapply again every year and continue to lower them.
Get more grant, okay.
That's right.
And they build upon a grant, upon a grant, upon a grant.
Yeah, now, in theory, remember this, when they do that every year, let's say they do it for 2 or 3 years in a row, they're actually lowering their tax rate, right? So they too should then be kind of dropping down further on the
Right.
list, but at 642, I don't know how far down they're going to drop.
Got it. It might go down to 300 from 200, and here we
Maybe.
are. Okay.
Yeah, and I think we're probably talking, typically, I think about the first 25 to 30 districts on the list will get a grant.
Okay. So it's not likely that we get a grant, but we're voting on to apply for the grant, but that doesn't mean that we're voting on to accept the grant.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, because I just see like, maybe it's not all positive.
Yeah, and like I said, as I point out in here, there are some drawbacks to this that we would have to take into consideration and say, yeah, we're going to do it, or no, we're not. If I remember correctly, they notify you that you have the grant, and then you have a certain amount of time to let them know that you.
Okay. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Long explanation for the tax levies that I like to talk about. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Wraps you up for finance.
It does for finance.
But then we get to,
One change order.
Yes.
and now we get to move on to facilities, and back to you, Brian, again. A final change order.
Yes, thank you, President Dillon. I want to be brief with this. So you have on page 200, what page is that? 209. Okay, 209 of your document. You have a final change order here for Abbey Paving. Abbey Paving was the company that did the work on the South Campus parking lot right behind the Corral Building this past summer. And just to give you a quick look at this, we had the contract was for $418,000 to do that work. There was a $50,000 allowance in that work, and as you can see, we did use all of that $50,000. And in addition to that, we used $5,805.85 more than the $50,000. This is not uncommon with projects related to parking lots, and the reason it's not is because oftentimes, let me take a step back. What happens is they do soil boring, soil samples underneath the parking lot before you restore it, put it back in. Those are only soil samples, and what ends up happening is a lot of times is once they actually remove the old parking lot, you get in there and you start to see that there are other areas where there's additional stone, there's additional drainage that's needed, all those kinds of things. And so what ends up happening is you put these allowances in here because of those real unknowns with parking lots, as you have large areas obviously covered on the ground that you can't really see until you get there. And so ultimately, that's really what, if you look here, if you look at the number 5 there on the document, the new unit prices for the undercuts, that was $30,000 right there, which those undercuts are related to reinforcing those areas that need to be before you reinstall the new parking lot. And so obviously you see that was a large sum of those dollars. There were various other small projects that added some costs, and you can see those there. But all said and done, again, I think this is actually really a good outcome on this particular project. Original contract, $418,000. Final contract, $423,805.85. Based on approval, and just so the board knows, we have paid them at this point the $418,000 based on approval of this final change order. We would then pay them the remaining $5,805 and the change that's there. And then we would close out this particular contract. Be happy to answer any questions on any of the items that are listed here. Other than that, that's all I have on that.
You know, I understand point number 5 as being something that couldn't have been anticipated, but some of these other things, I mean, are they projecting into this 50,000 allowance at all? Because like, I'm looking at number 1, dump site for Petromet to remove existing asphalt. That seems like that should have been anticipated.
Well, so here's what happens. As you remove the asphalt, they can test the content essentially of it, and there was some material in there that they couldn't dump at a regular, it's an older asphalt that's no longer used, and so they then have to look at dumping that at a different site. And again, normally that would just be part of that $50,000 allowance to say, hey, look, we think that these things are going to be there, and so we're going to put this dollar amount in there.
So when they project the allowance, they're actually projecting for things that they suspect are
That's
going
correct.
to be there. So
That's
really,
right.
it's not that we went, $53,000 over.
No.
That $50,000 is always expected to be used.
Okay. Especially on parking lot projects, because, like I said, until you remove the old parking lot, you take soil samples, soil borings in certain areas, you test them, and say, yeah, okay, this looks okay, and then you take it, and then you remove the old parking lot, and there's, flat surfaces that need to be reinforced, drainage issues, and that's really what that's about. So yes, a lot of that is projected based on what we know at the time.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I know that some of these, like we've had change orders that have gone above, like what we've allocated for additional funds. Do you think that's just because of, are we doing my first question would be, are we holding back enough when we do some of these projects so we don't have so many change orders to do that with the cost of everything going up in construction? So is that percentage we're holding back appropriate?
When you say holding back, what do you?
Like the change order, we had $50,000 allowed.
Yes.
But with everything increasing in price, that maybe that $50,000 allowed now, like 5 years ago, that would have been a great percentage of the project. I don't know if it's based upon percentage of the project or whatnot, but should we look at, for our new projects, maybe a larger, like allowance?
Yes.
Percentage of allowance, because I think we've had a few of them, I don't know that I can recall them right now, but I know we've had a few increases to them. So that way, we would be more accurate in our estimate of the work.
So the answer to your question is yes. What will end up happening is, as we look to future projects, we will be adding more in for allowance dollars. This is a number that our architects calculate for us, and they will say, okay, look, here are what we think are the, very possible unknowns as we go into this. They base it on the market at the time. So when we bid these projects back in 2021, essentially, that's when they look at it and they say, okay, here's what we think the number will be, right? And remember, once we award a contract to a contractor, they're locked in on that price, regardless of what happens after that. So inflation, in this case, could go sky high, but they're still locked into this contract.
Are they locked, but they're locked into the contract, but they're not locked into the changes that are there because those are on current prices?
No, a lot of that pricing, essentially, some of it is based on unit pricing that's in the contract itself. And then there are other items that we say, look, there's an unknown here, we find it, what is the pricing of that going to be? And then we talk that through with them.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but do you feel like we're holding back for these projects an appropriate number? Because especially when we're looking at bigger projects, like, when we have for the upcoming year, we had extra monies allocated toward them. So are we doing the appropriate holdback, or does this kind of unseat, do you think?
Yeah, I think in future projects, you're going to see larger numbers.
Okay.
As far as those.
If that's what it is, that's better than having a surprise late, a couple of these add-ons later on, because I think that gives us a more accurate number.
Yeah. Well, and remember too, the original contract at $418,000, really, we're only $5,800 above that. And so, like I said, I think that's actually a pretty good number for this type of a project.
I'm not saying it's not, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
did we hold back the
Yeah.
appropriate number?
So just to give you a different example on a different project, you get into and this happens occasionally, you get into a wall, right, and you're going to replace some plumbing, right, it's a plumbing project. And there's asbestos that nobody could see beforehand, right? So now you have to look at a change for that. And so in future years, when we look at those dollars, right in the current times, we're going to say, look, maybe that was valued at a $10,000 amount 3 years ago. It might be $20,000 next year. And so we would be adding that into it. And that's what we'll be doing.
So just trying to aim for, because I guess, my whole thing is I just want to be more, how can we be more accurate? If that means holding back some more, it's better to have better news to say, hey, we're getting back 5,800.
Yeah.
Instead of paying 5,800 when you're looking at all the projects.
Yeah, we've had that situation too.
Right.
We've had that situation too.
Oh, absolutely, but I'm just saying though, for like this, should we look at like a higher percentage increasing it?
Yeah, so there's one downside to that. And the downside is, if we say, look, we want to have a fairly accurate number. And the reason I say that is because, remember, that then becomes part of the total contract. And so let's say we had the contract for $400,000. And in this particular case, we put $100,000 in instead of $50,000, right? So the only downside to that is the contractor then thinking, well, I got extra money here I can work with.
Oh, okay.
And I'm at $500,000. Oh, boy, I'd really like to get that. I'm not saying that that's what they do. I'm just saying that I'd really rather have a much closer,
That makes a lot of sense.
accurate number than saying, look, we're like $50,000 over what we thought.
Our budget might be better, but not for them, and okay.
Exactly right.
I just,
And it's,
Yeah.
I mean, it's within 1%.
Yeah, I mean, like I said,
Absolutely.
that's why I said I think this one's really in good shape.
I think the difference is thinking about it in terms of the fact that that is not a holdback, but an allowance that's projected and
Right.
talked about at the time when the bid is happening and being approved.
there's a different perspective you're saying of looking at it.
Yeah.
Instead of saying we might get the 50,000 back. We have to assume that it's going to be spent.
Yes, I mean, when it's in that total contract amount, and really, the architects they're pretty good, unless we find something that's really.
But I would say 1% is pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, unless we find something that's really out of line with what we thought. And of course, at that point, we'd come back to the board and say, hey, look, this is what happened, this is what we not anticipated. And so, that's why I said, that's why you have these allowances in there. And yeah, sure, the best case scenario is we don't use any of it and we get it back. I mean, we've had those cases as well. Some of the projects are easier to determine than others.
Thanks for talking me through that.
Yeah, sure. Any other questions? Sure, if not, then we would ask the board to approve this final change order, like I said, and then we would pay that final $5,800 to Abbey Paving and close out the contract with them. Thank you. Sorry.
No, it's all good. Thanks, Brian.
You're welcome.
All right, now move on, guys, to the strategic plan updates. We're going to do about goal 3 and 4.
Yep.
I will turn that over to you, Dr. Waterman.
All right, thank you, President Dillon. Tonight we're excited to share 2 strategic plan goal updates with you, and that's for goal 3 and goal 4. Goal 3 is related to our desire as a district to maintain and support a high quality and diverse staff. Goal 4 is related to our desire to strengthen our family and community partnerships that have, honestly been so strong in this school community for decades. So our plan is we're going to share a brief overview of each goal and the strategies, and then dive a little deeper into a couple of the highlights within each goal as well. We've got a team of people here presenting. I want to thank Amy Johnson, has been so patient waiting for this part of the agenda. So Amy, thank you for being here tonight. Ed Piotrowski, Jen Rowe, Jen Tyrell, Christine Zeman, and Amy are going to dig in here with goal 3. Do you have the PowerPoint all ready to go?
Yeah, I do.
We'll start with goal 3, then move into goal 4.
Good evening, everyone. As we're waiting for the projector to get going, it should broadcast my screen and the PowerPoint up. It's very similar to what we did last month with the Goal 1 update. Tonight, we do want to talk briefly about Goal 3, and then Dr. Waterman will follow up with Goal 4 to give a brief overview about what the goal entails, the steps that we've taken so far by way of meetings with the action planning team, to determine some priorities, and then additionally some steps that we have taken along the way in relation to some of those specific actions. So what is Goal 3? Well, Goal 3 of the strategic plan addresses the action steps that LT is taking to invest in staff and culture to ensure innovation, collaboration, and accountability. Very similar to what you saw with Goal 1 and how the steps and the strategies within Goal 1 supported everything about LT. You'll see that for all of our goals. No one of these goals is a standalone goal. They are all interrelated, and you will actually see very similar themes throughout professional development, support of our staff. You'll even see it into things that may not have human resource implications like facilities and resources in that respect, but all of it supports our team. Breaking down Goal 3 a little bit more, it's to invest in staff and culture to ensure innovation, collaboration, and accountability. And within Goal 3, we do have two main strategies. To enhance staff satisfaction, innovation, and campus unity through engagement, collaboration, voice, and professional development, as well as attract, recruit, hire, mentor, and support strong employees who reflect the LT community and commit to our mission, vision, core values, and goals. So the themes that we're going to talk about today may not fall within one of these strategies, completely, but there is a lot of overlap between the two of them, namely professional development. Professional development, you will see in that strategy, which is actually strategy 7, that's on the left-hand side. But professional development and professional learning is also something that's used to mentor and support strong employees here at Lyons Township. The collaboration efforts that we're going to talk about with colleges and universities, those can fall under both those strategies as well, and some of the things that we've been doing with hiring practices meet both of those strategies. Taking a deeper dive again into Goal 3, you see the overall goal, the two strategies, and then you see the bulleted items underneath. Those bulleted items under each strategy are really the main focuses of those strategy, so that we know what are the types of things that we could do to achieve the outcomes, to achieve the goals of those strategies, and how can we do those. These are more of the hows, not necessarily the what specifically. We'll get into that specifically in a little bit, but what are the hows? Then if you drop down all the way down to the goal metrics, and again, this should look very familiar to what you saw with Goal 1 last month, the goal metrics are the things that we are going to use to measure our success. These are ongoing measures of success. It's not something that we measure once and then say, okay, our work is done, we're never going to review it. Remember, a strategic plan is a multi-year plan, and so we know some of these things may take a little bit of a longer time to reach those goals. Some we may hit those goals quickly, and then we will readjust those targets to continue to move forward in a positive direction. But as it relates to Goal 3, what do those goal metrics look like? Those goal metrics include things like staff demographics for both our certified and our non-certified staff. They include staff retention, again, for our certified and our non-certified staff. Certified staff panorama survey. So what that is, we know that we've administered a panorama survey to members of the LT community, including staff. We are measuring belonging, a sense of belonging as we work with our staff. So that is one of our goal metrics for Goal 3. Special population endorsements. That relates to the percentage of our certified staff that hold endorsements in areas that we consider to be special populations. Endorsements for working with students with special needs, endorsements for working with English learners, bilingual endorsements, reading specialist endorsements. And then finally, staff engagement. Staff who are engaged are going to be more beneficial to the community. They are going to be able to engage our students. They are going to be able to work through professional development initiatives and move the district forward. So we are talking about engagement not only in curricular initiatives, but also in co-curricular, extracurricular initiatives as well. So what has happened so far? This year, this fall, the Goal 3 action planning team has met 3 times, and each one of those meetings was very deliberately focused to take one aspect of the strategic plan, action planning process, and move forward. So that very first meeting that we had in the middle of September was really a review of the strategies and the objectives, those bulleted items under the strategies. We refined those to get a better grouping, a more accurate grouping of what we felt was important. The second meeting that we had 2 weeks later was really to identify what were some of the current and future actions that we could take to help support this goal. And finally, our final meeting in the middle of October was really prioritization of those actions. We have a lot of things we would like to do. What do we want to do first? Why do we want to do those? And let's put a plan in place. So a summarization of the goal metrics, the prioritization of actions, that's found on page 211 of the materials that were presented. You'll see a summary document that has what we are hoping to do by the end of 2023, by the end of 2024. You will also see a copy of the district scorecard. Those have those goal metrics as well as the target, the baseline numbers and the targets. Again, that's very consistent with what you saw in Goal 1 and what you'll see with Goal 3 tonight. So what are some of these strategies that we'd like to highlight tonight? Well, one is hiring practices. In a minute, Dr. Rowe and I will be talking about the hiring practices that we have here at Lyons Township High School and some of the changes that we've made, even prior to the strategic planning process, but also in conjunction with the strategic planning process. Partnerships with colleges and universities, not only to support our staff here if they want to continue their education, but also partnerships that are going to help us find, attract, and hire new educators to the district, as well as looking at partnerships to help some of our current non-certified employees maybe take that step to become certified employees down the road. And then finally, professional learning for employee work groups. Dr. Tyrell, Christine, and Amy are also going to jump in with that as well to talk about some of our professional learning opportunities. I'll be talking about paraeducator staff and classified non-contractual staff. 3 of them will be working to talk about certified staff and what we've done to support our staff throughout the current school year. At this time, I want to turn it over to Dr. Rowe, who will move forward talking about our hiring practices.
Thanks, Ed. Thank you, everyone. In all of our work in the development and implementation of our strategic plan goals, we continue to work towards more equitable outcomes and to apply an equity lens in our approach. And I hope that these questions are starting to become familiar to you all because they're ones that help to guide us in our approach all the time in this work. So this focus on maximizing opportunities and working to eliminate barriers has been integral in this work being done here in all of our goals and in the work that we're discussing tonight with Goal 3 and also with Goal 4. Okay, next slide, please. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our hiring practices as Ed was sharing with you. So our hiring practices have been updated to better reflect the values and goals that are imparted in our strategic plan. These practices are in alignment with the needs of the district as we work to have a staff that reflects both the values and identities of the diverse students that attend LT today. When job seekers first initiate an application for a position with the district, as a part of this initial screener, we have initial screener questions. 2 are explicitly equity-centered, with a focus on sharing about what a culture of belonging means to them in their work with students with diverse needs, experiences, and backgrounds. And it was great when I first connected with Ed. That was one of the, I think, the first things that we got to work on together was reviewing and updating those initial questions. As well, applicants are then invited to submit a video interview, and this experience allows for a more intimate connection to candidates that may be overlooked by only asking them to engage with the interview process via a written response. Having both the video interview and the initial written application responses as a part of our process, we are able to have a more robust experience with our job candidates. And I think all of us can understand what happens when we are actually seeing something versus just hearing it. Those videos have really helped us in this process. We have also worked on establishing interview protocols that include the organization of a diverse interview team, which always includes at least 1 student. And I cannot express to you, just from my own personal experience coming in with those 2 kiddos, how they are the most important people in the room. So we know that the student voice is so important, and having them included in this experience has been critical as we work to hire teachers and other members of the LT team. Each interview team participates in a 30-minute training session together that is focused on hiring from an equity lens. Here, the team shares together about the importance of all aspects of diversity. They define implicit bias, along with the impact of blind spots. I think it's been really neat how, even though you might be a person who's done 1 or 2 or 3 interviews that year and it's the same training, it's so different each time you go through it with a different group of people. And I think having that ability of coming back and reflecting on those things each time is just a really great practice. So that interview team looks at some of the most common types of bias that can show up in the interview process, such as maybe halo and horns, immigrant bias, gender bias, affinity bias. And then the interview team discusses the ways they can actively work to counter these biases in their interview. So again, we know that just recognizing something is the best way to disrupt or interrupt those behaviors when you're actively thinking about it. So that's why I'm really proud that we do that every single time prior to an interview. And I also most appreciate how, again, each of those interview teams is able to discuss what their needs are, what skills or qualifications are needed to make our team better. That means our greater team. This moves away from just discussing the concept of right fit. Okay. We also review how the interview will operate and how at least 2 equity-focused questions or scenarios have been included in the interview experience. So again, our guidance team might be looking at 2 equity-focused questions with a scenario based off of their work needs. All right, thanks. So again, here are just some of the major components of the hiring for equity training. Again, we'll discuss the benefits of adverse staff. We would define implicit bias, explore the impact of blind spots, examine many types of biases, review those ways that we can actively confront them, and review the components of the LT interview process. And that's really understanding what to expect during your time. One of the big things that we've talked about is we're usually very friendly, but if we find out like someone who happened to be an LT grad and then we start talking to them about it to make them feel comfortable or to engage, now we're all of a sudden leaning into that, that affinity bias. So we've talked about how we want to make people feel welcome, but we also want to keep it going without leaning into that connection. All right. Here's an example from the hiring from an equity lens training with the common definition we use to define implicit bias. It has been extremely helpful to have a common vocabulary and foundation of knowledge for all interview team members, and intentional time together to process through our goals and expectations has been key. This recognition that we all have biases and that through engaging in open dialogue to process through these interviews has assisted our hiring teams. Our hiring teams are intentional in examining their own perspectives and know that being aware of the impact that bias can have has helped to support conversation as they move through each of those individual interviews for that day. And so now, Ed's going to share with us some of our most current hiring data.
Thank you, Dr. Rowe. As you recall, the second strategy in Goal 3 relates to hiring, retaining, and supporting our staff, with a specific bullet point in those objectives reading, strive to hire the highest quality employees, and when possible, mirror the demographics of the LT community. Our goal metrics show that there is still a great deal of work to do and movement to make related to the overall percentage of non-white certified staff and non-white classified staff related to our student demographics, but we have set a target of annual new hire demographics to match or exceed non-white student demographic percentages. On that scorecard, you will see that descriptor. This table shows the staff demographics for new hires broken into 2 main categories. The column on the left are for certified and administrative hires, and then the middle column is for all staff, and the column on the right is the demographic breakdown of students according to the most recent Illinois Interactive Report Card. While we did not hit our target for new staff who have self-identified as Hispanic, we are proud to report that the percentage of our new staff self-reporting as Black or Asian Pacific Islander does exceed our student population, and we are making movement towards towards having our staff match our students. Overall, we are proud that our percentage of non-white staff has continued to grow, rising from approximately 10.5% in the 2017-2018 school year to approximately 13.5% for this current school year. Another thing that we are proud of are our college and university partnerships. In many years, in recent years, many colleges and universities have moved away from the traditional career center model of job boards and employment opportunities and towards online resources to support their students as they seek employment after college. Handshake is one such option that is being utilized by employers and colleges to reach students who are looking for positions in many different fields. LTHS has a Handshake account with connections to 209 colleges and universities throughout the United States, including representatives from different geographic regions and institutions that have historically served underrepresented populations. Additionally, we have formed connections with both Aurora University, where Dr. Rowe and I have spoken to their education students about working in a teaching field, but also about opportunities for observation and student teaching at LT. We are also in the process of forming a partnership with Illinois State University to create pipelines of student teachers, as well as for them to assist in professional development for our administrative team where appropriate. One last thing that came out after we submitted it to this board, on Friday I actually met with two additional colleges and universities, North Central College and Grand Canyon University, who are very eager to work with schools to help build those pipelines of non-certified staff moving into certified positions. So people who might be in administrative assistant or clerical roles, who might be interested in moving into a paraprofessional role, or a paraprofessional who is interested in moving into a certified teacher role. And they're coming up with creative ways to help school districts support those staff to do that, where typically it would involve a student teaching experience, stepping away from a school. So we're excited about those two partnerships, and we'll continue to work with both those schools and any additional schools that make themselves available. And then finally, the last strategy that we wanted to talk about related to professional learning. I want to talk about professional learning as it relates to paraeducators and classified non-contractual staff members, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues to talk about certified staff members. For our professional learning related to paraeducators, over the course of this year, we have utilized our professional learning community time on late start days for our paraeducators, who the majority of them work within our special education department, to work with special education personnel, whether it's classroom teachers, inclusion facilitators, program coordinators, to strengthen their abilities to serve students with special needs. This has also included work with crisis prevention intervention, or CPI training, at the beginning of the year for paraeducators whose assignment would call for that. And then the specific division and department meetings if people work outside of special education. So we do have paraeducators who work in math science, in language arts, supporting students who are English learners within our libraries, within our labs as well. They work with their individual divisions and their departments on those professional learning days. And then finally, we also use those professional learning days to help some of that mandated compliance training that the state of Illinois requires. This gives an opportunity for our paraeducators to complete those trainings. Moving on to classified non-contractual employees, this is a group where we actually established a professional development committee this summer. So I'm happy that this summer of 2022, we identified a group of classified non-contractual staff members that include representatives from administrative assistants, tech services personnel, student assistants, to really come together for the purpose of identifying professional development and culture and climate opportunities for our classified non-contractual staff here at Lyons Township High School. Some of the things that we have worked through this year in conjunction with some of Dr. Waterman's work with associate school districts with school safety training, specifically geared for people in those types of roles where we have training, classroom training, but we also wanted to provide school safety training for people who work outside of classrooms. We also brought in representatives from the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund for a presentation on benefits available to our classified non-contractual and paraeducator staff, buildings and ground staff who participated. Google technology training is something that began last year and has continued this year. There was Google technology training on November 16th on the early dismissal day, and we're also looking to continue that into January and into some of our opportunities in second semester. And then finally, again, mandated compliance training as those come up. But this professional development committee is a committee that meets, for a while we were meeting every week. Now we're about every other week that we are meeting. But the committee is committed and excited to continue to find new opportunities and explore new ways to provide professional learning to staff. Another thing that they are very excited about is providing a way for classified non-contractual employees to come together, whether it was through targeted outreach to get people from that work group to participate in our staff tailgate or social gatherings outside of the school day. Those contribute to that sense of belonging, that culture and climate that we were talking about right now. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Tyrell, who is going to talk about our PLC framework as it relates to certified staff.
Can I ask a question? Just going back to the paraeducation.
Yes.
Educators for professional learning. So do the paraeducators come in for Institute days?
They are in for all Institute days with the exception of the October Institute Day. But all the other Institute days, the early dismissal days, and late starts, they are in attendance, yes.
And so they're provided with the same kind of training and professional development?
Some of the strands may be different, yes, but there are professional development opportunities for our paraeducators during those days as well, yes.
Okay. And then the other question was, what is the handshake?
Handshake is an app, and I saw Jill nodding over there. Handshake is an app that allows colleges and universities and their students to connect with employers. It also is a way to host virtual job fairs and events for schools to really, in the past, if we were looking for, let's say, a world language teacher, I might reach out to DePaul University, National Louis, and ask them to post a position on their job boards or to send an email out to their teams. What Handshake does is we create partnerships with different colleges and universities all across the United States. Then when we have a position that we want to post, I create that position, I post it to Handshake, and then the individual schools will look at it and determine whether they will approve that posting or deny it. Oftentimes, if a position is denied, it's because they might not have that program. For instance, we would get denials from Baylor University because they didn't have an agricultural education program when we posted that. Sometimes they might ask for additional information. We change the posting slightly, and then they will essentially push it out to all of their students who have a Handshake account. My understanding is colleges and universities, through their own internal work, are telling their students Handshake is a way to find this information. And I see Jill nodding over there, so I think that.
I get my interns.
There you go. There you go. So it is great, and it allows schools to really have a much larger reach than they would have in the past, where you might advertise regionally. But we do have students that travel to colleges and universities all throughout the United States, and so there's value in reaching out to those colleges and universities to see if people are interested in continuing their careers or beginning their careers here at Lyons Township.
Okay, and then one last question. So do we have what is that? Because I don't see anything with student teachers. Mm-hmm. Do we have a student teacher program?
So the student teachers come through partnerships through colleges and universities. So it's all based on two big factors: whether or not the colleges and universities have student teachers in those fields that they are looking to place, and whether or not school districts can accommodate those student teachers. They may already have accepted student teachers, or they may not have availability for a student teacher in a very small field or something. But we typically receive student teachers from University of Illinois, Illinois State, local colleges and universities. They will contact the Human Resources Office with a request for a placement. We then work with the division chairs to determine if that can happen. We are looking to establish a more formal partnership with Illinois State University. Some of our local associated elementary districts are doing the same thing as well to find student teachers in the elementary in the elementary fields. So that way we could say we will commit to taking student teachers teachers in social studies, in math, maybe 5 or 6 a year. So that way they know that they can place their student teachers there. We've looked to other school districts to establish some of those partnerships as well. We reached out to Roosevelt University to try to establish that. Roosevelt University has a very large partnership with Chicago Public Schools because of the size of the district. They're able to accommodate a lot of student teachers. So sometimes it's hard to get other school districts to come on board, but we're working to do that as well.
I was going to ask that same question too, and I'm just curious, like, if you had to ballpark, how many student teachers might we have in any given year?
I believe we had 4 first semester, and I think we'll have another 4 second semester.
Okay.
So I would say anywhere, 8 to 12 on a given year is probably a standard number. They're not all going to be at the same time because most student teaching experiences are going to be either a full semester or part of a semester. And then sometimes, if you're in a position, for instance, if we have a year where we may have a lot of new staff coming into a smaller division, we may not accept a lot of student teachers because there aren't a lot of experienced teachers that can be those host teachers or the cooperating teacher for them. Yeah.
Well, that's what, so then my next question then is like, what kind of lift is that on our teaching staff if they raise their hand or are asked to partner with students?
Yeah, every school district, every college and university program is a little bit different, but generally speaking, if one of our teachers is partnered up with a student teacher and they serve as the cooperating teacher, they're going to be working with that student teacher throughout the semester. And at some point, they are going to transition the daily delivery and instruction to that student teacher, and it takes time. It's not day one that the student teacher is doing it, right? But then there's going to be ongoing reflection and collaboration with that student teacher. There is also going to be ongoing meetings and work with the cooperating teacher's supervisor at the college and university. So it certainly is additional work that those cooperating teachers take, but there certainly is a lot of benefit in it as well because it allows us to form those connections with colleges and universities. It also gives us a way to really work with our student teachers, and when positions open, whether they're mid-year long-term sub positions or if positions open up, we've had a chance to see these student teachers working with our students and see how they are and can mentor them early on, and then oftentimes they can either move into a role with us, should we have a position and we select them for it, or they're then prepared to move on to a different school district if there are positions there.
Serve is a really long interview.
And Ed, do our teachers, our experienced teachers, do they volunteer to be those people?
We do. We have a great staff here that is always looking to help out.
Well, but I think you do have to have that culture too, that you're fostering here that is going to really have that to be able to put in the time.
Yes.
Because there's a lot of extra time for the teacher to do and work with. So I think you have to have some kind of process and culture of that, kind of pipeline working.
Absolutely.
Through,
Absolutely.
In the district. And then also too, we have a number of teachers that have their masters. So really what is the the viability of a new teacher being able to come in who doesn't already have experience or a master's?
As far as being hired in
the district here.
Oh, we are hiring people with varying levels of experience every year. It's not simply people with masters in education. We're hiring people with, a bachelor's degree coming straight out of student teaching. Absolutely. Absolutely. And to address.
Is there a benefit to the students to have teachers who, versus the teachers that have a lot of experience?
I was commenting, there's, I think one, you have to have a culture, and I don't know that we have that culture yet, of that continuous, because
From a student teacher perspective or from a classroom teacher perspective? A culture of inviting student teachers in our building?
Correct.
Yeah. That's the
And
whole
building
idea.
up that-
Building that partnership with
That's-
universities, for sure.
There's a question.
I just wanted to say, just if I can, from a teaching perspective, a lot of times, like in language arts, for example, we don't take a student teacher for our full day. Like usually, like in the language arts department, I think it's pretty much practice that 2 teachers share a student teacher. That way, it's not a full load on one person. That way, it's a benefit to the student teacher in that they can see 2 master teachers teaching. If there are issues with a student teacher, the 2, on-staff teachers can have conversations on ways how to support them. That student teacher is exposed to a variety of instructional strategies, different classroom management styles. So that's something, I think in terms of building that culture, that's something that we are committed to. Yeah.
And that has become pretty standard in my conversations. Thank you, Amy. I was going to mention that to address what you were talking about the increased workload that it would come. Many colleges and universities are looking to have more than one cooperating teacher, if possible, to provide some different perspective and to give them an opportunity to work with different people. But then it also assists with the cooperating teacher that they have classes that are still theirs, as well as classes that they're working with those student teachers to support.
I just want to jump in with one thing. It's interesting that LT, because we are a single school district, sometimes that has been harder. I think what Ed was saying is that sometimes university, it's easier for them to participate and funnel into much bigger districts for placement. And we're kind of like in an interesting location of being located close to CPS. So they have very specific relationships with universities, and those universities can only have their teachers placed there. So that's the piece that, like, even with us with Aurora University, with us going out, we know the demographics of that university, and so we're trying to make ourselves available. Like, we are really close enough for you to come here. It might be a little bit further because also there's restraints on those teachers with transportation and things like that. So we're like this hidden gem, and so it's how are we in a single school district, with just high school. So that's that part that we're working on so that we can have those partnerships so people can say it is worth it to kind of connect with us. So I think it's not just like LT being resistant in any way. It's also working with those universities so that they can recognize that this is a great place, and it might be a little bit of a stretch and we might not have as many positions as a larger district. So it is really exciting though at this time of building those partnerships. So hopefully we'll have some other folks coming here to see what LT has to offer.
And with respect to the cooperating teachers and the student teachers that we have, are there certain mandates from the colleges that they're coming from that we have to kind of adhere to? Like, in other words, can the cooperating teacher decide how the student teacher will be incorporated into the program, when the student teacher will be incorporated? Or does the colleges that they're coming from have some say and requirements as to what they need to experience as a student teacher in one of our classrooms?
Every program is a little bit different. A lot of those decisions are made early on through collaboration between the student teacher, the cooperating teacher, and the student teacher supervisor, where they put together a plan of when classes will be taken over, maybe which classes are going to be taken over. There's also requirements for the state of Illinois. It's called EdTPA, which is really a review of student teaching, which involves the creation of videos that are then submitted. So those are time intensive as well too. So all of that is factored in. So that way the student teacher has time to really, begin taking over those classes, feeling comfortable with them, and enough time to start building to that EdTPA. So everything isn't rushed and the person isn't just thrown in. But a lot of those are individual conversations. I could speak back to many years ago when I was in the classroom and had student teachers. We had some where the colleges said, the expectation is they're going to pick up 2 classes, within the first 2 weeks, and then the remaining classes 2 weeks after, and then others where it was a gradual work-in. So every school district is a little bit different, but I haven't seen any sort of agreements where it's very prescriptive and prohibitive that this is how it has to be, because there is a lot of fluctuation and movement that goes along with it.
And in all cases, is the cooperating teacher always there when the student teacher takes over, or what you're describing?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure I understand in terms of.
Operating teacher always in the classroom as part of like.
Yeah, that is our expectation, that they are there to be working with them, to mentoring them, to be supervising them, to, work with them in the classroom and be part of that. Yeah. Absolutely.
Dr. Tyrell, we can share about that. I can speak too, but I know.
Oftentimes, I know a lot of our kids through different leadership groups, student voice work, my advisory, so we think about kind of the position and then the characteristics that the student might bring to the table, also their areas of passion as we get to know them. So sometimes, in my principal advisory, we may be talking about SEL work. Well, if we're hiring for a counselor or a social worker, we might select a student who's really passionate about our support of students' mental health. If we are hiring something within the area of a certain, like associate principal, we included one North Campus student, one South Campus student, just to have different voices at the table as well. So area of interest, representation, and then just kids that have done a really good job of sharing their perspective, feedback, and voice with us in various roles here.
Two amazing girls from, I think, Latinos Juntos who were on the interview panel. They had talked right away with Dr. Tyrell when she came on, and it was interesting seeing that. So a great way to have those kiddos involved.
They take their role so seriously, and they do a fantastic job. And oftentimes, our candidates that we are interviewing will they'll prioritize questions that they can ask to kids at the table. They really do, and it's awesome to hear their feedback as well as we go around the table afterwards and debrief and talk about strengths that each of the candidates bring. Our students have some really great takeaways and points of feedback that they share at the end of those processes.
You know that firsthand, having gone through that process yourself.
Multiple students.
That was a large group of students.
Fantastic.
It's a great experience for the students, though, to get a perspective of this is what's involved, this is how you might evaluate.
They get to see how serious it's taken.
Yeah. This summer, when we were hiring our division chair for fine arts, we found a student, art, world language, and music, and we found a student who's involved in all three areas of programming here. Molly Sloan, she did a fantastic job participating in that small committee. So we try to match student involvement, interests, passions with positions that we're hiring as well. All right.
It never fails that when you ask the candidate what questions they have, they look right at the student.
Right at them.
They always ask them questions. So we always prepare them for that.
Jill.
I have a question with regards to Goal 3, Strategy 8, on page 216. So when you look at the one prior to it, on page 215, you have stuff that you're investigating. But I'm looking at this, you have implementing and then developing. You have two of the same things that you've done. Will there be anything else added to that?
I don't want to change it on my computer.
It's on this. Okay, I was going to say, it's like if it helps you here.
What page are you on, Jill?
216.
I'm getting there, hold on.
Okay.
Okay, so
Does that
are you
make
asking
sense?
why we have some that are in developing and implementing?
No, and like you don't have investigating, because developing and implementing, they're the same thing. So it doesn't look like, from what you're talking about from a hiring perspective, anything's going to change.
We didn't put it in investigating because we've already begun to put those things into place, and then we'll continue to develop those and change those as they happen. So
When I'm looking at them, they're the exact same. That was what I was.
Which one are you talking about, Joe? Which item? The
Like
hosting
when you
and
look at hosting and participating in additional career fairs, like those are the same for developing and implementing, as well as the expansion of screening videos, which I thought was great. But
So investigating is like that first step where you're not implementing anything, you're not developing, you're literally just exploring it and doing research on it. So those types.
there won't be anything new added, is what I.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're like kind of here.
Basically, yeah, there's no more research at this point to do on that. It's more about we're doing the work.
Got it. Oh, that's, so there's nothing,
kind of the step
and it
one,
seems
step
like it
two,
was
step
pretty
three.
good. Like there was a lot of success from the last round of hiring. So right now you're not looking to add anything. You're just looking to kind of keep
We'll
this,
continue to refine it, right?
keeping this going.
Right, and the things that are listed in both developing and implementing are because when we met, and this was in the third meeting that we had, where we determined the prioritization and then determined, which one of these three buckets, for lack of a better term, would they fall into. We didn't see anyone that we were fully implementing yet because there was still a lot of development that was going on.
Got
to
it.
do some of those of those revisions, and just from a stylistic, aesthetic purpose, we put it in bold, just because we didn't want to have it cutting across both of those things. But that
It's kind of like in the middle.
Correct.
If you could ride,
It has, yes.
ride it, you'd be right in the middle.
Absolutely. There's elements of development, but then there's elements that are
Okay.
being implemented.
Oh, that helps explaining it, because I just didn't know why they were both there.
Yeah, that classified non-contractual professional development committee is a perfect example of that. We're continuing to develop new ideas, new avenues, new opportunities for people from a professional development standpoint. So those are the developing things, but then we're implementing the things that we've already been doing.
Perfect. Thank you so much for explaining that.
Sorry, I couldn't pull it up on my screen.
Oh, here. I think.
The last question, when you look at the goal metrics, because I don't know if we're going to get back to that.
I was going to.
Or are we getting back to that?
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay.
For goal 3, are you doing goal
Yeah,
3 or
for
goal
goal
4?
three.
Yeah, let's get through goal 3
Okay,
before
so
we move
goal
into
3,
4.
like the first one for staff demographics, certified staff, the baseline is 6.6%,
Correct.
but then the target is 7%. So is this 7% annually? So are you looking at like 7% this year and then another 7% the following year? Or is this, because the strategic plan is like a 4 or 5 year plan. So is that for the 4 or 5 years? Like, that's what I'm a little confused on.
So this is a target to move that initial certified staff demographics from that 6.7 to the 7, and then we'll reassess that target and continue to grow. That's why we put that specific language for those top 2 goal metrics to really say, to make big changes in our overall staff demographics. That is something that takes time and can't happen overnight for a variety of reasons, and I'll talk about one in a second. So we wanted to set kind of that intermediate goal that every year we have a goal that our new staff that we are bringing on board, our new certified staff, our new non-certified staff, either matches or exceeds those demographic levels for our students with the goal or with the point in mind that by doing that, our overall percentage of non-white staff will continue to grow, and so that's where it's going. Our target, our goal would be, if we have 30% of our students being students of color, we would love that to be representative of our teaching staff as well. We know going from 6.6 to 30% is not something that happens overnight, especially if you look at the third line, which is certified staff retention. We have a very high retention rate. We have 97.2% of our certified staff who return from year 1 to year 2. So what that means is that is a huge benefit because it provides stability, it provides consistency, it provides all of those wonderful things. But what it does not do is it does not provide a lot of opportunities for new hires into the district or new positions. And so when we have a lot of room to grow and a lot of movement that we need to make for certified staff demographics and not a lot of opportunities to do that, we wanted to look at that intermediate step of the year-to-year hiring to make those steps.
I think in general too, from a scorecard perspective, as our action planning teams and leadership team, we're looking at targets. It usually falls into one of 2 buckets. You're either trying to improve the metric you currently have, or you're trying to hit a number based upon some other data point. Like maybe the Illinois School Report Card or the Equity Journey Continuum has a number that gives us a certain designation. That would be like an aspirational number, and that could become a target. Versus we're just trying to achieve growth and improvement. So we kind of looked at it one of 2 ways when we were setting targets for all of the metrics, not just goal 3, but for all of them. And then you notice on there some of those are. We actually did administer the panorama survey, so we have to update that based upon the results that we just received. So those ones that say coming soon are ones that we've either just done or are doing. Like, for example, Goal 5 is all the financial information tonight. That will be updated now for our Goal 5 metrics, because now we have the financial statements.
I had a question on the metrics as well. Some of them are pretty obvious in they're very quantitative in nature. And then the ones that appear to be all, the 3 that are coming soon seem to me to be a little more qualitative in nature. Is there?
Real quickly, are you talking about for Goal 3?
For Goal 3, yeah, I'm on 217. Panorama survey, both for certified and non-certified, and then the staff engagement. So I'm assuming that we're not going to have any. It's going to be a first time administered, so that's going to become our baseline. So we don't really have a baseline for this. Are there other things that we've administered in the past that could help us establish where we were, where we're going, where we are? Like, I'm thinking of the 5 essentials or, something like that. These just, and these are all things that we are defining, right?
Right.
Yeah. So, I don't know. It reads to me as a little, this sounds negative, I don't mean to be negative, but it reads to me as a little soft, and it also reads to me as how do we know that those are really the right tools to gauge our staff's engagement and
I think it's important to probably talk about the difference between Panorama and 5 Essentials and why we landed on Panorama as a
Yeah,
as a
so
tool.
Panorama is the climate survey that the state of Illinois requires us to give, and we only give it one time during the school year. So we give it it's kind of like winter, January, February. And not give it another time during the school year. So measuring growth is really challenging.
You're talking about 5
Five
Essentials,
Sorry,
not
with 5
Panorama,
Essentials.
5 Essentials.
Thank you.
Which we've done before, but we want to
Yes,
get out of
and
that.
so it's hard to kind of measure growth with 5 Essentials because you can only give it one time during the year. You also cannot take 5 Essentials data and disaggregate it out. You just get your student numbers and your staff numbers. So with staff, we can't look at certified versus non-certified with 5 Essentials. They don't give us that data. With Panorama, it is a survey that many schools in the area give. So it's not just something that we picked out of a hat. It is a well-known survey that has a lot of comparison data, so we can look and see how we compare to like schools. We can give that survey as many times as we want. So we gave it this fall. We just got the data back, so we're diving into that to see what it tells us about our staff and our students' feelings and opinions about the school culture and climate, and then we can give that again in the spring to see if the initiatives and the programs and the things we put in place made a difference. With Panorama, we also can disaggregate that out by however we want. So we can look at different race ethnicities and how they replied on the survey. We can look at our certified staff versus our non-certified staff. We can look at special education students versus non-special education students. So it helps us know more about our students and our student groups instead of kind of getting this global picture. We did look at the 5 Essentials data when we were trying to decide what pieces of the Panorama to use. So when we administer the Panorama survey, they have a lot of survey questions and we have to narrow it down to what we want to ask. Otherwise, kids would be spending hours taking the survey, and we don't want that. We really wanted to keep it at that 10-15 minute mark. So the team that picked the Panorama questions used 5 Essentials to kind of help narrow down what we wanted to get more information about.
But you keep mentioning students, and I was reading this as a staff survey, the Panorama as a staff survey.
So we gave Panorama to students and staff. The student piece of it is used for Goal 2 metrics.
Okay, gotcha.
So
Okay.
student sense of belonging, as well as the student survey has a diversity and inclusion metric as well. Those are both on the Goal 2 metrics scorecard.
So it sounds like it has a lot of potential to be a great tool. We just have to get past
Get some data in
to get
place.
some data
Yes.
to
So-
understand where we are.
The admin team has report training on it later in December, and so that'll really help us understand its full power and what we can do with it.
And then we're going to do a Goal 2 update in January, which you'll see the metrics for Goal 2 are also related to the Panorama survey that the students took.
And for the staff engagement, are you saying that that's also part of the Panorama survey and self-reported? Because I feel like we would also have plenty of data on how staff is involved.
Yeah,
Progress.
that is the
It
work
just
in
takes some
progress,
time.
right? That is one when we, the first thing we want to do is establish, what are the things we're looking for
Okay.
engagement, whether it's professional development, things that we would do during the school day, planning period, professional development, participation on an L team, working with an instructional coach, right, for instance, but membership on committees, participation in co-curricular. So it's a lot of
Sponsoring.
Right.
all
Right,
different
it's a lot
ways
of
that
information that exists in many
outside of the
places.
classroom. That's what we're trying to measure. We just haven't got to the point where we've defined it clearly yet.
So we're gathering that.
So much.
Yes. So that one is qualitative in terms of what are the types of things we're looking at, but then it will absolutely be quantitative when we're able to put a number on, and then also determining what's that level that would constitute engagement. Is it participating in this many things, or is it just participation holistically?
Fair. Okay.
I do have one more question on goal 3 with when you have your target for the staff demographics.
Yes.
When you have that versus certified staff to non-certified staff, how were the difference in the numbers determined? Did you have 7% your target for staff demographics for certified staff, and then your non-certified staff is 25%?
That was through looking at a couple of different factors. First off, where we are baseline-wise, but then also looking at some of the other things like our retention rate. We do have more opportunities with non-certified staff. We do have more opportunities bringing staff in. We do, whether it's paraeducators, classified non-contractual buildings and grounds, there are generally more opportunities for new staff coming on board, which provides us a greater opportunity to change some of those demographics through hiring processes. So we believe that we can make a little bit greater changes on a quicker scale through the non-certified side than we might from the certified side, just because of some of those factors as well.
One more part of goal 3, right? Professional development.
Yes. So before I kind of start with talking through a couple of aspects of our certified staff professional development plan, it's important to acknowledge that these are only a couple of parts, and our certified staff professional development system is very comprehensive, and there's a lot of people involved. Dr. Rose led efforts with Karen Reno, our professional learning team, equity ambassadors, instructional coaches, tech coaches, division chairs, Scott Eggerding. There's a lot of players involved when we're talking about certified staff professional learning. But today we're going to talk about 2 job-embedded professional learning opportunities for our certified staff, and also 2 opportunities that align to some of the recent shifts that we've had in school calendar and collaboration time. So when designing our school-wide PLC framework this year, we took into account the fact that we are launching a new curriculum review process, and that our 9th grade core courses would need to utilize the PLC time in order to continue their work within the curriculum process. As we were planning for the school year, we also thought about some important considerations when planning our PLC framework. We wanted to develop a process that would be aligned to our curriculum review process, and this is twofold. We acknowledge that teams that are completing the review would need PLC time to continue this work. This takes a significant amount of time. And we also wanted to develop a process that was supportive of other teams in preparation for their participation in the curriculum review process in the future. This process allows us to extend our collective staff knowledge with respect to Goldie Mohammed's pursuits, as well as the SEL standards. At the beginning of the year, teams took time to consider how each potential inquiry would impact their students, as well as discuss the learning outcomes that they would expect to see as a result. They then formulated an inquiry question to explore throughout the year that will increase student outcomes. In addition, they discussed professional learning resources, so articles, books, podcasts, different resources that they can use as they engage in the work as teams. So I'd like to take this opportunity to just read you a few sample inquiry questions within each of our lines of inquiry, within each of our strands. So from a tech perspective, our special education vocational team, their question is, how can infusing differentiated technology into vocational training improve student success and outcomes? Fine arts, our music teachers are exploring how can we positively impact student outcomes by intentionally applying culturally responsive pedagogy to our repertoire selection, introduction of music, and facilitation of interactions in the LT choir family. A question out of our language arts division, how does the consistent and intentional use of SEL in the classroom impact student outcomes? And another question aligned to our disciplinary literacy strand, how do more diverse writing experiences paired deliberately with regular low-stakes writing reps advance student outcomes across all types of writing instruction? How do these strategies develop voice, individual style, and advance the specific skills needed in an AP course and exam? And those are just a few questions that few of our many teams have developed as they're pursuing their line of inquiry around culturally responsive pedagogy, disciplinary literacy, infusing technology into instruction, SEL standards, and our math teachers are exploring mathematical mindsets and Joe Bowler's work. In addition to learning more about the strand areas through the PLC team's work and inquiry development, we designed a system that allowed for certified staff to attend formal professional development quarterly, and that's something that we discussed discussed at this table. When we're making a shift in our calendar and looking at increasing PLC time, we also wanted to increase the opportunity for some learning for our teachers. So in addition to the job-embedded learning and discourse that they're having within their PLCs, we have monthly or quarterly professional learning opportunities. Dr. Rose providing professional learning within the area of culturally responsive pedagogy, which gives staff an opportunity to extend their knowledge of the framework of culturally responsive pedagogy through the work of Goldie Mohammed. Our instructional coaches are providing professional learning within the area of disciplinary literacy with a focus on embedding disciplinary literacy strategies within the classroom. Leslie Owens is leading the SEL strand with a focus on utilizing tools developed by the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning Standards, that's CASEL, and the strand focuses on supporting teachers with the integration of Illinois State SEL standards, which is a part of our curriculum framework. And our tech coaches are working with staff, large numbers of staff who have selected the strand technology enhanced curriculum, and they're focusing on the SAMR model and moving our staff through that model where and when it makes sense. So utilizing that time on a quarterly basis for our staff to engage in professional learning, and then an opportunity for them to bring that learning from those sessions back to their teams, continue their discussing, tweak their lines of inquiry, try things out in the classroom, talk about that practice and how that practice impacts student outcomes has been a really valuable experience this year. The other aspect, and obviously we see a lot of Goal 1 connects as well. So both of kind of the things that I'm going to present, PLC time, PLC professional learning, as well as SIP day time, that early release time, there's several connects to both Goal 1 and Goal 4, and I think that we're going to see that more and more as we continue to present these updates, and that's how it should be. We should have overlap in our work that we're leading here at the district and building level. The return of the early dismissal time allows for departmental and division learning that otherwise would not exist, and this has been extremely valuable this year. This time's given our division chairs the opportunity to plan valuable learning experiences, departmental collaboration, and identify areas of focus that align to strategic plan goals, strategies, and metrics. And this slide highlights some of the areas of focus, not all of them, but some of the areas of focus for departments during early release time. We have used a combination of internal leaders, external presenters, and external presenters on these days as our division chairs have planned these valuable learning experiences for teachers, counselors, social workers, and other certified staff members. And I think you can see a really diverse kind of list of professional learning and professional development offerings on that slide. Tonight, I'm going to briefly highlight the work of our CTE teachers as it aligns to the Goal 4 update as well. And then we're going to also, Christine and Amy are going to highlight some of the SIP focus areas within the language arts and math departments. During the November 16th collaboration time, I had a chance to sit with Dan Bies and Danielle Redzalowski as they led our CTE teachers, and they started discussing program areas and completing an audit with relation to these areas that are required in order for a program to be endorsed as a career pathway. Those discussions were awesome. So I sat in with the large group and we went through kind of a framework for our teachers to sit in teams and program areas. An example of a program area is aviation, right? Aeronautical aviation. And so there's criteria that program area has to meet in order to qualify as a potential pathway. So I'll just share with you kind of the large scale categories. Work-based learning experiences, which is 60 hours of career development or internship experience, presence of a regional advisory committee, course sequences that contain at least 2 years of coursework, 6 credit hours of early college credit classes, 2 team-based challenges, industry certification, 2 verified guest speakers, career-related electives, and career-related activities. So there's limited amount of guidance available at what qualifies under each of those categories. So it was really neat for our teachers to begin to wrestle with, hey, do we think we hit the mark there? Where might we be short in this area? So that was an initial conversation among our teachers within program areas, and they discussed the required areas and outlined for each of the courses, experiences, and certifications, collaboration opportunities that we currently offer within each of those areas, and then put some questions that they might have to follow up with leaders within that area, and then things that they might need to bolster within each of those areas in order to get us closer to qualification as a pathway. So really great initial conversations, and gives us valuable information for us to be able to utilize as we continue our planning, our formal planning for pathways at some point in time.
So can I say, like, 'cause at the III conference, I attended one of the breakout sessions for career pathways. So I didn't really actually realize that, is it that in the next 2 to 3 years or 3 years that all high schools are going to be required to have career pathways, like, outlined?
Yes.
For students within their curriculums?
So I believe that there's a mandate for us to have one by 2025, and then another one kind of in the subsequent year. So it's kind of a slow time frame in terms of when we have to have those pathways, but we've already identified one area that we should be able to hit the target within that first year to be in compliance, and over the course of the next few years, continue to look at all of the other program areas to see the things that we would need to do to have identified pathways in those areas.
I think too, the important part of this work is differentiating between where we can simply reorganize an academic program guide and just and do course sequencing versus identifying career pathways, which is a much more extensive, as Jen talked about, there's a list of requirements you have to have in place to do career pathways. So we'll do both of that work over time, but this part is the much more extensive work. It's a big state level initiative as well, as you've heard.
Yeah, so I didn't know if the rest of the board was aware that is something that is happening on the high school level.
And that's super exciting. I mean, it's great. Like, I just wrote a note to myself that, like, I'd like to sooner versus later understand what programs we have in place other than aviation right now that are in some process of being a pathway. I mean, because it feels like it. And when Scott, we talked about I can't pull the name for it, but the medical healthcare, that's exciting to hear those things and we have so many robust offerings. We need to make sure if we're offering those programs that we do have the whatever qualifications and requirements they have for the kids, for our students to be able to take advantage of it and for it to mean something on the other end.
Absolutely.
So that's super exciting.
All right, now I'm going to invite Christine and Amy to talk a little bit about the work of our Language Arts Division and Math Division during their SIP time as well.
The Language Arts Division has been focused on the analysis of student performance data and an ongoing review of existing instructional practices to determine how we can best match what we teach to what our students can do now and what they need to be able to do in order to be successful on the SAT in April of 2023. As our work pertains to student performance on both the reading and writing and language subtests, we are discussing instructional strategies for grammar, genre, comprehension, text selection, etc. In September, we examined the test's format and content to identify skills that we can immediately begin to emphasize in our courses. Teachers met in their course teams to brainstorm ways in which they can reformat or reframe what they are teaching in order to reinforce what the test asks students to do. In November, several teachers in the division shared tried and true instructional practices that support student performance on the test's rhetorical skills questions. In February, we'll tackle the reading subtest, considering the types of texts students will see and providing practical applications of relevant reading approaches. The last session in March will highlight a few historical trends seen in test items and provide teachers and then students with high impact strategies they can implement on test day.
I would just add, I had the opportunity to pop in after Amy had presented and her colleagues had shared out at the last SIP day with our Language Arts Division. There's a great buzz that is in the room when we have this opportunity. We're a big school, 2 campuses, and the opportunity to get entire divisions and departments together on a regular basis in order to share strategies, share the things that they're doing in the classroom, practices that are proven, that work, that lead to student achievement, improvement, and outcomes is just so significant. And having several of Amy's colleagues share during that time, it's valuable. You learn from each other, you take those practices, you can walk out of the room and apply those practices to your own practice. So I appreciate, we appreciate your leadership in that area, and Amy's already talking about how that work might also impact our global studies division and our social studies teachers and our science teachers, because reading within the SAT is really all of our jobs, and how we attack text and things that we can do with our teachers in other areas to increase their understanding and their support of students within their content areas is huge. So thank you.
One of the things we were able to do at the most recent session was we actually, working with Christine, we were able to provide them with actual student performance, test item by test item, how many students got this right and how many students got this right. And I think that was really interesting for them, as well as we actually reviewed scoring, and they were really excited to see how just a few more questions can really make an impact in raising student scores. So I think that was sort of an impetus for excitement and wanting to get to work right away.
Clearly, Amy's background in SAT prep is shining through.
Yes.
Has a strong background in it. So.
Well, I mean, and we talked about this when we went through the report card and performance and looked at this, and you had mentioned that the work had already begun in this area, and it's super exciting to go at it in this very intentional, data-driven way, not because of the controversial end of teaching to the test, but because the tests are tied to the standards, and to be able to address this in the mode of all classes, as you talked about, Jen, for global studies, all of that is going to just bolster what our kids know and can show that they know exponentially. So it's super exciting, super exciting.
The Office of Assessment has partnered with Renata Elvey, a K-12 director at College Board, to provide SAT training to all Lyons Township mathematics teachers. The first training session provided an overview of the SAT suite of assessments, a review of spring 2022 SAT data, analysis of sample items, and a deep dive into the skills and concepts assessed in the mathematics domain. During the November session, teachers analyzed the instructional planning reports from the spring 2022 PSAT 8-9, PSAT 10, and SAT. Teachers utilized College Board's Skill Insight document to identify suggestions for improvement associated with various score bands, and analyzed the question analysis report that Amy was just talking about to identify questions LT students frequently missed on last year's spring assessments. Conversations in both training sessions focused on how teachers can use the new information in their instructional planning and their curriculum development. The next 2 learning sessions will focus on teacher classroom tools, available Khan Academy resources, and a thorough examination of the transition to the digital SAT assessment.
Again, very exciting. Very exciting.
Yeah, and I've been in all of the math sessions, and just like Dr. Tyrell was saying, the buzz with the math teachers is exciting to see. Like, they're excited to start incorporating questions. Looking at the questions our students have actually seen on the test has been very eye-opening, and they're excited to kind of change the way they're asking students to demonstrate their knowledge in the classroom to better mirror the test. Because you're right, we don't want to teach to the test, but we want to make sure that our students are prepared to demonstrate the content we're teaching at the rigor and the item level that the SAT is assessing.
And then to be able to take it a step further, to after the students are taking these tests on a yearly basis before they get to the SAT, to understand where they need improvement and use Khan and other tools like that. That's really. And then the best thing yet is that this is all aligning with the curriculum review and the strategic goal. It's like, this is this is why we do these updates, right? This is why we do these updates, because it's showing just the mass alignment that's going on and all the robust activities that are going on, and the strategies and the tactics and all of that to line up and to move our kids forward. It's really, really great. Really great.
Before we move into goal 4, let's make sure, what other questions, thoughts, input into goal 3? I would echo what Jen said earlier, like this is all collective work. So there's a bunch of people here, but there's a bunch of people not here that's helping with this as well, whether it's leading, facilitating, learning, participating. And there is so much overlap, like, you know, we're a school, right? So goal 1 and goal 2, that's always our focus. But goal 3, goal 4, and goal 5, really all that work supports us achieving in goal 1 and goal 2. So hopefully you start to see that come through where, I mean, we can talk about professional learning in goal 1 as well, but it really lives in goal 3 because that's really about our high quality diverse staff. So anything else on goal 3?
Just thank you for providing that summary and insight, really well detailed insight into how you're using that PLC time. And like, it just seems like it's like starting the brew, and then you guys are going to be involving that cross-divisional input to each other that creates a much bigger, comprehensive, holistic approach to how our students are educated. So thank you.
It's a big commitment, right? Like we talked about this last spring, like that time is our most valuable resource. And so we appreciate that support and are happy that we're able to put this into good use.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's move into goal 4. Goal 4 is all about family community partnerships and partnering with our families to support and expand learning opportunities for our students. And it really is kind of segmented into 3 different approaches. Approach 1 is really about the way that we communicate, collaborate, and really be transparent with our community. Part 2 is kind of what we talked about a little bit before with the career pathways conversation, and how do we leverage our community partners to provide those learning experiences for students. We have a few limited ones in place right now, and we know that needs to expand. And I'll go back to what I said a month ago, like there's a reason that these strategies are in place for each goal. It's because last spring there was a whole group of people that identified these are areas we need to grow in. So I don't ever want to lose sight of that, as there's a reason why they're identified as strategies. And then the third piece is all that work that happens with our associate schools and really promoting high school readiness for students who will be with us at some point. So moving on to the next slide, again, this should look pretty familiar. Those 3 strategies are outlined, and then the bullet point list is really the list of action plans that are happening, the work that's happening. The goal metrics related to this goal, we're looking at things like open rates on weekly principal messages. We're looking at open rates on the monthly board briefs. Mary Lynn back there is tracking a lot of social media data, Twitter activity and Facebook activity, things like that. And then, of course, getting into the different surveys we're giving. We're also looking to expand. We traditionally administer a freshman preparedness survey to our current freshmen, and we provide that feedback back to our associate schools. But it's not something that we've ever required students to take, so our participation is pretty low. So we want to expand that as a survey tool. We also look at some NCAA clearinghouse data, like freshman to sophomore college persistence rates, 6-year college graduation rates as well, which are common metrics that the NCAA clearinghouse has. Our action plan team met 3 times, September 13th, really to look at the strategies and objectives and identify the rationale. September 26th to look at what is the kind of how Ed said it earlier, it's the how versus the what. Like we identified the what back in the spring, but now we have to figure out how we're going to accomplish that, and then really start to look at meeting 3, October 11th was prioritizing those actions. So I want to start kind of like we did with goal 3, not talk about everything, but just highlight a couple of areas. I want to talk about communication and then also our associate school articulation efforts. So with communication, this whole fall has really had a bit of a different feel from a communication perspective, from the sense that we really wanted to be creative in the ways that we're sharing and communicating with our school community. We've always used email and social media in a variety of ways, and that includes Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And those channels do continue to increase, as I mentioned earlier, but we were really looking for different ways to allow people on campus, allow people to learn about what we are doing. So just going back, a real quick list, expanding the LTCAC, that's a really important group. We've traditionally had about 50 to 60 members of our community on there. We have 125 on there this year. We've had anywhere from 60 to 80 show up at our first two meetings. The Board of Ed has done a couple of community chats that allows community members to come out and talk informally. I mean, board meetings are formal, right, from a public perspective. So that's been something really good. We hosted a community collective in October, which was local realtors and business partners and just really villages, municipal leaders, give them a chance to come out. Our whole team presented the strategic plan to that group. We hosted again the Sankofa Coffee Community Collective, which Jen Rowe has led, which is a really good parent opportunity to come onto campus. I've started hosting monthly lunchtime webinars just to share information, updates, reminders. Usually it coincides with the board meeting, so I can share some actions that the board has taken. So I think just trying to do that more and more and trying to, again, be creative with those types of events. And moving into second semester, the big thing coming is the launch of the website, which will be here in a few weeks, right when we come out of winter break. The new website will be ready. So that's kind of on our radar. So that's all about communication. So I'll pause real quick and just see if there's any input or ideas, thoughts about community communication. It's been a long night.
It's been really great. I've gotten good feedback from other people about it, though, who've participated, and they really appreciate it, so.
And that's all a commitment to your time, right? And people doing extra things, but it makes a big difference. So.
Yeah, to your point, Joe, it's a ton of people, right, that are pitching in and doing it, and I hope our community appreciates that. So it's good. The second part I want to highlight is our work with our associate schools. That's another really big, important part of Goal 4. The first part of this fall has really been sharing our strategic plan work with our associate schools. We hosted an event on September 7th where we invited the district leadership teams from each of our 7 associate school districts to come learn more about our plan. It took us about an hour, a little over an hour, to share all 5 goals and the strategies associated with them. And then we actually did some job-alike breakout sessions where all of the curriculum directors came together and all the student services directors. And so they had a chance to start to unpack that, the plan. We've also started to discuss high school readiness and specifically really to start to define what role as a high school we play versus what role middle school plays and define getting students to high school ready, and we are here to support our associate schools in their efforts, and we're fortunate to partner with such amazing associate schools as well. And then of course a big part of that process is the 8th grade to 9th grade transition. And so I've had a couple of really good discussions with our feeder school superintendents, and then Jen Tyrell has had some really good discussions with the middle school principal specifically, and she's going to talk a little bit about what they've done.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Waterman. I'll start this. My update really is going to include a few things. It's going to be about our articulation specifically with principals. I'll share a little bit about our division chairs work with subject and content area teachers, then talk a little bit about our placement process and our events as well. So during the summer, our leadership team developed a transition timeline for the class of 2027, which included events for incoming students and families. And after developing that initial timeline, we looked at developing a calendar for articulation opportunities at the principal level. So we decided last year we had an initial meeting, which was myself, members of our leadership team here with associate school principals. We had one of those large-scale conversations last year. This year we wanted to increase that to 3 conversations. So we looked at the time frame and scheduled out 3 different opportunities for those articulation meetings with the principals of our associate schools. At the beginning of November, all 6 of our public associate school principals, so Dr. Waterman referenced 7, that includes LADSI, so all 6 of our middle school principals came came to LT South Campus for a meeting, and Scott shared that he did not remember, and Scott's been part of a lot of articulation meetings, he didn't remember a time when all 6 of our public school associate principal partners all came to LT for a collaborative discussion, so that was huge. Our division chairs participated, all of our division chairs, myself, and Greg Gardner attended the meeting on LT's behalf, and we previewed the class of 2027 transition process and also the events that would take place as part of the process and our communication plan. We're really intentional about sharing all of our communications that go out to incoming students and families with our associate school principals before we launch those communications so that they can help us and we can collaborate in answering any questions that students and families may have. We also talked a little bit about the redesign of our transition events. So we included this year a November 14th event that we called the kickoff event that was designed specifically to create excitement around the LT experience. So we removed some of the components that were formerly part of Future Freshman Night in the spring. Over the last year, we've encountered families that really want to get into LT earlier to see what is LT all about. Let's generate some excitement and really have the information to be able to make an informed decision when they are making decisions about the high school experience for their family. So the November 14th event included a co-curricular activity and athletic fair. Greg, Drew Eater, and myself with a couple of students did a welcome presentation, shared some academic, student support, and co-curricular and connectedness highlights. And there was also building tours, student-led, or families could lead their own tours in order to see some of the can't miss spots at South Campus. That'll allow for the January event to be really more focused on academics. So at that point in time, our students and families are thinking about registration. They're thinking about course selection for the freshman year. And so we figured if we removed some of those elements out of the January event, we could have a more focused event in January and meet the needs of our families at that particular time, which it really is all about selection and selecting the right courses for the start of the freshman year experience. So as part of that experience, and we're working on our planning right now, some of the things that we're talking about, elective fair, an opportunity for our students and families to learn about all of the elective opportunities that our incoming freshman students have a chance to be part of. Potentially an AP panel in which we talk about, those entry-level AP courses, AP Human, the benefits of AP as a student is progressing through their LT experience. First-time LT families, talking about, core area presentations where they can learn more about, our offerings within the core areas. So we're still building that, but it'll be a more focused night. We also will still do our webinar, and the webinar will precede that on-campus event so that everybody has the details around placement, recommendation, course selection, and then we'll open the door for them to explore more about the specific programs that we offer on that on-campus event. I also wanted to take this opportunity, we've had some questions here about the placement process, so I'd like to just share kind of our large-scale framework for placement. So our associate schools make recommendations for English, math, science, and in some cases, world languages. And from the beginning of the process, how it starts is we create, and we went through this with all of the principals when they were at LT in November, we create a spreadsheet. We create a spreadsheet and share that spreadsheet with each of our associate schools. So each of them will have their own working document. And we utilize kind of this formula. We utilize MAP scores in order to generate an initial placement recommendation. Okay, so we use score bands from MAP testing. Our partner associate schools will input those results, and upon inputting those results into their spreadsheet by student for math and reading, it will auto-generate a recommendation. Well, we all know that there are times when maybe that MAP score might not match a teacher who's worked with the student's recommendation. So there's always an opportunity for the teachers that are working with students within each of those content areas to share some additional information and maybe adjust that recommendation for conversation with our LT leadership team about why they see that student potentially being recommended for, oftentimes it's a higher level course. So we never want to box ourselves into saying it's only a score that gets a student into a course. It's a recipe, and that recipe includes a test score. It includes a teacher recommendation and valuable input from a teacher that's worked with students, and it also includes student and family input as well, and so we always want that to be part of our process. So spreadsheets are shared with schools, MAP scores are entered, associate schools have an opportunity to share their comments, share additional information that will involve our collaborative recommendation process. So just for this group's, just for all of your insight here, English teachers will recommend students into English 1 Prep, Excel, or Honors. Science for the coming year will recommend into Bio, Prep, or Excel, and math teachers will recommend students for geometry, Excel, and Honors if they are already successfully enrolled in Algebra 1 or Algebra 1, either of our levels, if they are not successfully enrolled in Algebra 1 at our associate schools. Social studies teachers do not make recommendations, so it's open enrollment by student and family into either world history or AP Human Geography, and we have conversations at the DC level with teachers at articulation meetings about AP Human and some important factors to consider when they're working with students and families, and encouraging them to challenge themselves and think about that as a potential option for freshman year. World language teachers for those associate schools that teach French and then Spanish, for students who are taking those courses, they will also make recommendations as well. So those are the areas that we make recommendations for, and ultimately the family will end up getting our recommendation, which is a collaborative recommendation that's made between ourselves and the associate school, through a placement letter. And within that placement letter, it also details our process for level changes. So this is a starting point. When our families get that letter, we want that letter to read as if this is a starting point. These are our recommendations. Here's the information that went into us making this decision. But families and students always have the opportunity to have discussions with our division chairs, and in instances, almost all of them are about students challenging themselves and accessing a higher level course. And we review data. We review data on level changes in almost all instances. When students say, I want to challenge myself, I want to move into a higher level course, oftentimes they do really well in that course. I'd also like to share with this group that we are still working with our associate schools around our equity and achievement work. And as a division chair, division leadership team, we're talking about how we can marry our EAT, our equity and achievement team work, with our EOS work. And we believe strongly that there needs to be significant integration between those two programs. So historically, our EAT program, we would work with our associate schools, and they would identify and share students who are on free and reduced lunch lists from our associate schools. And we would use those to identify around 40 to 50 students per year, and we would make their recommendations on their behalf. So we would look at students who we could bump up and get into Excel and Honors courses, who might not have been placed there, but who are in bands similar to other students and families that have requested level change processes. So we, on behalf of the student and family, would initially recommend them into higher level courses. We're expanding that work this year to be aligned to our EOS work, in that we are also looking at students of color. So we are, and for EOS, our EOS work, we look at low-income students and students of color. We are doing the same with our equity and achievement work this year. And Michael, I think you've asked this before, right? How do we make an impact? EOS is great, and we're identifying students who are here with us that we believe and that teachers believe and people who have worked with the students believe they can do it. They can be successful in an AP course. But we know that we have to continue to do that upon entry into LT to make a difference from initial placement. And so we will continue to do that work as a foundation for our EOS work. Within our EOS work, we've provided supports for students. Those supports haven't always been available. Some of them have, to our students who have been part of our equity and achievement work. So I think we'll continue to have those discussions about additional supports that we can provide freshman year upon entry into LT. Additionally, DCs facilitate articulation meetings as well. So what I've kind of shared the structure for has been mostly our principal articulation meetings, first meeting in November. Really cool thing that's going to occur. The next 2 meetings, we're going to go out and meet at our associate schools. So I pitched that idea to the principals. They loved it. This gets our leaders into our associate schools. In a perfect world, we'd rotate every couple of years and be able to get to all of our associate schools so that we can, do a little visit, see the schools, potentially pop into classrooms and have an opportunity to get to all of the schools. Our DCs facilitate their own articulation meetings, and that the number of times that they meet depends on the content area. They talk about placement, they talk about changes within courses, particularly at the 9th grade level. They talk about standards, they share instructional strategies, so they're facilitating those on an ongoing basis, working with their assistant chairs and working directly with teachers from our associate schools as well. And then later in the spring, we're going to explore some keys to a successful transition to freshman year, as well as keys to a successful freshman year, which will ultimately, as Dr. Waterman shared, aid conversations about high school readiness. And we'll continue to explore collaboration opportunities in support of students and families as they're transitioning to LT. We had a great brainstorm of additional things that we can do during that 8th grade year so that students feel not just excited, but also prepared for the high school experience, and their families feel that way as well. And then in the spring and in the summer, we are going to individually work with all of our associate schools in support of our students who are transitioning in. So myself, Greg Gardner, our freshman class assistant principal for next year, Daryl Mathis, and Drew Eater will talk about students who may need some additional academic, behavior, social, emotional support as they're transitioning in, so that we can start right off the bat with providing those resources. So those conversations had historically been done. COVID kind of put a stop to some of that collaboration, but we're going to restart those conversations as well to make sure that students really who need the support are on our radar from the second they step foot in LT, and we can enhance our support of them in all areas. That's, I think, all I have for tonight.
Go quickly, goal 4.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, it was a lot, but you did it as quickly as
I tried.
Really, really good, yeah. Do you feel that you have enough resources to do the things that you've outlined that you're doing? One of them being, I think it's really critical and really important to have those connections with the schools and to be able to get that time with them. Do we have the resources in place to be able to do that effectively? To be able to, it's again another time. It's almost like the community engagement, those things that we do outside beyond what happens here that we function. So I think my question to you would be like, to really look at that and see if there's something that we should know about that
we
could or should do to help support.
The articulation efforts that happen between high school and middle schools, that's all just meeting time, and it's also email communication, Google Doc communication, and things like that.
But it's some of that face-to-face, it's some of those things that we talk about for, I think especially like for that readiness part of it, there's probably some conversations.
Absolutely, and that's just looking to find common time where you can get groups together, like she did with the principals a month ago, and I've done with the superintendents, like the division chair. I mean, if you look at all the different meetings and conversations that happen, it's pretty extensive, because even, like Julie Jacobo, Brotherly Court, like she's done articulation work with our feeder schools, and each of our division chairs works with their content area teachers in the 8th grade. At the 8th grade level. So it's all just meeting time, really.
Right. And I guess, and I don't know that this would be an answer or a solution, but, is there, do you have a dedicated resource that does that for or on behalf? I don't know. That would, just that person, like you said, getting all the different division chairs is hard to get that kind of time. Is there someone who acts, on behalf of all the divisions to be able to make that connection to our schools? And we have a lot of feeder schools, so it is, I know, a lot of time, but it's a really important thing to do if we're going to change.
Yeah, I think when you get everyone in the same room, you can work through a lot of things. I mean, that's really been our strategy.
I guess I would echo Carrie's statement, but with a little twist in that the same thing would go for the professional learning time. Like, I think on our calendar, we're one institute day less than we've been in years before. And I would echo Carrie's same question is, we're doing a lot and we all want to succeed at everything we're doing, but time is a critical resource. And obviously, there's only so much we can do, but I'm very mindful of that fact that we've lost an institute day, and it constantly goes through my mind is, what could we do if we were to put that back, so. Yeah. The other thing, I think it's wonderful, everything they described. I think it's great that you met with the feeder districts or the associate districts. Do they ever do the reverse? Many of them have strategic plans. Do we know what their strategic plans are?
Part of the discussions I've started having with superintendents is a couple things. Finding commonalities. Like, we all have either, we call it Portraits of a Graduate, they call it Portraits of an 8th grade graduate. But so we've started to have discussions on that topic. Like, where are the commonalities, and what do they see as a successful 8th grade graduate versus what do we see as a successful incoming 9th grader, and determine that list. And we have metrics all over our scorecard that identify that, whether it's Goal 2 with freshmen on track, or student behavior, attendance at the 9th grade level, freshman preparedness survey. The conversations we've started to have are that we can put that information together and almost build a picture of what it means to be a successful incoming freshman. And then that can ultimately define or evolve things like Freshman Experience Day and the 8th grade transition that Jen talked about. Like, there's a ton of events that are already happening that we can make even better with the data we're collecting.
Absolutely. I think too, another thing that when we think about our students that are coming to LT, and you made the very poignant and important statement that we need to know who those kids are that are going to need support before they even walk through the door, and have them on our radars. And I know, I don't know if it was last year or when it was, but I'd ask the question of, when we look at our struggling students, how long have they been in our broad community? And the percent, I don't remember, the percentage was really high of students that we're getting that have been in our associate schools since kindergarten, since preschool. So I would love to see some creative energies around what we can do at LT, because that's part of our community. This is Goal 4. Those it doesn't matter that they're not here now. That's part of our community. So I would love to see some creative energies and thought around, are there things that we can do at LT District 204 to help support what they're doing, and especially when I think of some of the achievement work. I mean, that stuff has to be happening at a very rigorous, in many ways, at the associate school. So why wait till they get here? Why wait for our students who are there now to come here? Are there ways that we can push in and offer some support that would make a difference when those students walk into LT?
Well, I think you need a resource behind that to do that. And I think that we all know who the students are coming in, because when they are being placed, you get a snapshot of who those students are. So it's not like it's a mystery. And when we look at the placement too, I don't know if this is like the new year or first year of doing it, but the English was in the past the determinant of what science students were placed in. So is that something that's new this year?
That's been pretty traditional, that your reading scores have indicated placement at the science.
Right, so but now we're saying that the science teacher at the associate school is the one who's giving recommendations. Is that what you said?
The starting point is the use of the MAP score, and there's alignment in English and science recommendations.
But that's also one of the determining factors. But in the past, the English part was the main determinant of what science you were placed in.
That's a significant component. Yep.
Yeah. Certainly during the Explore progression, Explore score was a big factor in science placement. Like, that's right, when we first started Equity and Achievement, it was based upon Explore scores. And then once we got out of that, we had to introduce other.
Well, yeah, but even 4 years ago,
Yeah.
there was, the Explorer scores were not in
Gone,
place.
right.
And it was based upon the reading placement as to where science was placed.
Yeah, and that's still a factor. I mean,
Yeah,
it's just-
English, sorry to interrupt you, Dr. Waterman. So English, I just want to check my notes to make sure. Those students that are recommended for Excel and Honors English will be recommended for Bio Excel. And those students who are recommended for English Prep will be recommended for Bio Prep. So generally, and there's some differentiation based on student or teacher recommendations as well. But those are the courses that our incoming freshmen will be recommended into for science. And yes, it's aligned to English placement.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. I have
Yeah,
a couple questions,
sure.
just following up. So when you had talked about English and where they're going to be placed, you just stated there was only Prep, Excel, and Honors, correct? Well, where does the co-taught model come into that?
So co-taught will be offered in our English Prep, and our our special education teachers, our
So
special.
that will be the placement through special ed?
Correct.
But that, okay. so-
Co-taught courses,
So you'll make that recommendation too with them coming in through the special ed team?
Correct, and we're
Okay.
expanding our co-taught courses. I don't know, has Leslie shared that yet, or?
Goal 2.
Goal
So
2?
January 9th, we'll have a co-teaching team here, do a Goal 2 update and talk all about that program.
So that's work that we do through our IEP meetings and our annual reviews when we are discussing the placement of our special education
So that will
students.
also be
Yep.
discussed in the
Yep,
8th grade?
exactly.
Quickly, Jill, so that'll scale out to the sophomore level.
Perfect.
And EL as well, there's additional collaboration that happens regarding placement of our EL students that's outside of this process as well.
So, okay, I just want to make sure that process was done.
Yep.
And then the other question I have, but I might have heard it wrong, when you talked about the equity and achievement placement, you were looking for working with the kids, are you only relying upon the free lunch kids to make that placement?
No, so what we are doing is historically, we've looked at students who have been on the free lunch list at our associate schools, and that's been our starting point. We're expanding to looking at students who are designated free lunch at our associate schools and students of color who
Okay,
are
perfect. I just want to make sure I
incoming students.
misunderstood it, because I knew that had been the history.
Yep.
Of only the free lunch, and that was something that, I had always been concerned about, with, especially going back like 4 years, 4 or 5 years ago, that report. Do you know what I mean? That was done on that, one of the first
Longer
equity.
ago than that now.
Maybe, I don't know, a long time ago, but I just wanted to make sure.
Years now
Okay.
of equity achievement.
But that the first thing was just for the free lunch kids to do that, but I just want to make sure I heard it right. But it's also going to be students of color.
It is.
Okay, perfect.
Which
Thank you.
aligns more to EOS and, intersects those two programs.
Perfect,
more
that's why I just wanted
appropriately.
to, okay, perfect, thanks for clarifying that. I think I heard it wrong. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Other Goal 4 questions. So just a couple quick next steps. So like, as I said before, we'll do a Goal 2 update in January. We're going to do a Goal 5 update in February because it aligns with the facilities discussion we're going to have, and it's all out of Goal 5. All 5 goals will bring our action planning team back together in late February for a mid-year check-in, which really is a chance for the action planning team to identify what are our celebrations, what are our struggles, what are we learning, what resources do we need moving forward, all those questions. And then we'll bring them back together again in late May, right at the end of the year, to really start to craft next year's action plan. Because by that point, we'll have a pretty good idea of, here's the list of things we've accomplished in this goal, here are the things that we said we were going to get to and we haven't got to yet, so that needs to happen, that needs to roll into next year. So this process will continue, mid-year check-in February, and then end of year check-in, and really almost a starting point for next year in May. The other thing, we want to get to a point where our scorecard is interactive, and it's not there yet. Right now it's on the website, it's on our strategic plan website, but we want to have the ability to where you can click on a metric and see 5-year historical data on that metric. So we're working towards that as well. So we're just not quite there yet.
Great progress.
So, and I'll throw this out to the board too, like, we've sort of used a format for November and December to share the goal, but just dive deeper into a couple parts of the goal. If there's a different format, please let me know later on, and we'll continue to evolve this process. I know it's long, and I'm sorry, they get long, but we can tweak this if we need to.
It's the first time we've gone through this kind of exercise too, and had something so important, so tangible, and been able to have such great feedback from all the different teams. So I really I know we all really appreciate it and absorb it. It's a lot, but thank you for spending the time to do it, and thanks you guys for sticking with it. Thanks to the audience for sticking it out too.
Amy,
For
thank you.
participating. Amy, thank you for staying with us. It's so great, so. Okay. All right, at this time, we would begin the non-agenda related portion of public comments if we still have people here. We don't, okay, thank you. Well, that concludes that portion of our agenda. At this time, we are going to be moving back into closed session for the reasons stated on the agenda. So those of you who would like to probably move on, might want to move on. But the board will not be taking any action following closed session, so just so you're aware of that as well. And thank you all for coming too. If you are about to leave, we are all going to probably stand up at some point too. Yes. First, I need a motion here though, guys, before you go anywhere. Is there a motion? Sorry, is there a motion to move back into closed session for the reasons stated on the agenda?
So moved. Second. I'll let you have it.
First, who's got second? Second is Jill.
I'm
First
second.
is Allison.
Yeah.
Great. Marilyn, will you please call the roll?
Member O'Bear?
Yes.
Member Vita Daniels?
Yes.
Member Dillon?
Yes.
Member Gretsch?
Yes.
Member Kelly?
Yes.
Member Swinehart?
She dropped, but she's listening.
Member Thomas?
Yes.
She did. I think it timed out on her. It's been a while. So. Okay, thank you.
It was like a 3-hour cap or something.
Time to stand up, right? Hi, Bob. Thank you.
Can I say?
Yes.
How old now is he? Like,
Thank you.
so 3 months.